Chapter 202. Flowing lights and colorful lights illuminated the city, and fireworks lit up the night sky. The rumbling sound of firecrackers was like thunder in summer, carrying the people's desire for the new year, and instantly turned the dark night sky into a sea of fireworks. Zhonghai was different from Shangjing. Fireworks and firecrackers were prohibited in the outer ring of Zhonghai, so this scene could not be seen during the new year. Although the fireworks show broadcast by CCTV was gorgeous and lively, it was not as vivid as standing under the night sky. The overwhelming firework rain continued to bloom in the night sky. The little fellow stared at her big eyes, opened her small mouth, and was so excited that she could not even say a word. It was really beautiful. Fireworks were easy to cool down, but the fleeting brilliance was enough to be remembered for a lifetime. Later, with the help of Xianxia, the little fellow successfully ignited a sky rocket cannon. Her sky rocket cannon was particularly small compared to the large fireworks outside, but the little fellow was still very happy. The firework rain lasted for about 20 minutes before gradually subsiding. The reunion dinner was finished, and the fireworks were also released. This new year, she finally had a real one. The next day, when the little fellow slowly woke up, the air seemed to be filled with a faint smell of gunpowder. She sniffed her nose and suddenly smelled a strong fragrance. The little fellow opened her eyes and saw that Xianxia was sitting on the bed with a bowl of longevity noodles in his hand, slurping and slurping. So, this unwashed and unkempt little sloppy directly threw herself into Xianxia's arms, opened her small mouth, and wanted Xianxia to feed her. "Papa, I want to eat too." "You get up and wash up first, then you can eat." After that, Xianxia got up and left with the noodles in his hand, not giving in to her at all. The little fellow's small mouth twitched, and seemed to be a little unhappy. However, the temptation of delicious food was in front of her, so after hesitating for a moment, she obediently got out of the bed, and then followed Xianxia into the bathroom. These were longevity noodles that Xianxia had specially made using high-gluten flour. One strand was enough to fill a large bowl. Coupled with the bone broth and meat shavings that he had meticulously cooked, along with fried eggs, shiitake mushrooms, and cabbage, just looking at it was enough to make people drool. In order to make it convenient for the little fellow to eat, Xianxia also put the noodles in the most conspicuous position. This broth was not the soup dumplings of Wei Qian, so not only did it smell good, but it also smelled delicious when it was eaten. The longevity noodles were too delicious, so the little guy followed Xianxia's example, making slurping sounds as he ate the noodles. In just a short while, the bowl of noodles had been eaten clean. After she finished her breakfast, Xianxia brought the little fellow to the main hall. The first day of the new year was the day to pay New Year's greetings to the elders, so Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang were already sitting in the main hall, waiting for the little fellow's arrival. Xianxia led the little fellow to Qin Yongyan, and then the little fellow bowed to him and said, "Grandpa, Happy New Year. I'm here to pay you New Year's greetings." "How good child. Come, yesterday's doesn't count. Today's is the New Year's money from Grandpa." As he spoke, Qin Yongyan smiled and handed a big red packet to the little fellow. The little fellow touched the thick red packet, and suddenly grinned foolishly. Seeing this, Xianxia patted her head gently. Then, the little fellow seemed to come back to her senses, and hurriedly said to Qin Yongyan with a big smile, "Thank you, Grandpa. Happy New Year, Grandpa." The child was still young, so she didn't understand these traditional customs and ceremonies. Naturally, it was up to her parents to guide her. After she paid her New Year greetings to Qin Yongyan, Xianxia led her to Qin Yongwang again. Wuxia was particular about seniority. Qin Ring was the female, and Qin Yongyan was the maternal grandfather. Qin Yongwang was Qin Ruing's second uncle, so the little fellow should call him granduncle. Wang Chuanju was granduncle's wife, so she should call him grandaunt or great-aunt. Granduncle didn't sound as intimate as grandpa, so Xianxia let the little fellow omit the word uncle in front, and just call them grandpa and grandma. "Grandpa, grandma, Happy New Year." Wang Chuanju liked the little fellow very much. When she saw the little fellow bow to her, she immediately pulled the little fellow into her arms. "Nyanyan is so good. Come, Grandma will give you a big red packet." "Thank you, Grandma." The little fellow held a big red packet in one hand, and her little face was so happy that flowers bloomed. Legend had it that in ancient times, there was a kind of little demon called a ghost. It had a black body and white hands, and every year on New Year's Eve, it would come out to harm people. People were afraid that ghosts would come to harm their children, so that night, they would light up the lanterns and sit without sleep. It was called guarding ghosts. Because of the homonym of sway and ghost, everyone thought that after the child received the New Year's money, they could ward off evil spirits and exorcise them and spend the year peacefully. What the elders gave to the juniors was called ghost money. What the juniors gave to the elders was called lucky money. Generally, after paying their New Year greetings to the elders, they could go out and visit relatives. There were only so many people in the family, and they didn't have any relatives, so Wang Chuanju suggested that they take the little fellow to the temple fair to have fun together. Qin Xueqing didn't want to go, but before she could say a reason, Wang Chuanju glared at her fiercely. Looking at that attitude, it was impossible for her not to go today. Thus, the big family simply packed up and walked out of the courtyard together. There were 6 adults, 1 child and 1 cat. The whole family was really mobilized. The group of people walked out of the alley. Chen Shi went to the roadside and was about to call a taxi, but Wang Chuanju stopped him and called someone to send a car over. Then 2 red flag H7s with white and black lettering drove over from not far away. The license plate of the armed police should have the word WJ on it, but the license plate of the 2 cars was WL. Clearly, they were Wu Lian's cars. The drivers of the 2 cars had met Chen Shi before. They were the fake couple from the inspector's office. The man was called Xiao Wang, and the woman was called Xiao Lu. Xiao Wang parked the car at the entrance of the alley. After he got out of the car, he appeared very reserved and greeted them. Mr. Chen, Deputy Director Qin, Director Wang, Director Qin, Happy New Year. Just saying these titles made Xiao Wang feel a lot of pressure. When Qin Yongwang saw this, he smiled and patted Xiao Wang's shoulder. He said very kindly, "Xiao Wang, you've worked hard. Happy New Year." "Not at all, not at all." When Xiao Wang heard his leader's concern, he laughed foolishly. The inspector's office also had a rotation system. Because the New Year was very special, one day could be 3 days. On the 3rd day of the New Year, Xiao Wang could rest for more than 10 days. Moreover, the New Year subsidies were very high. When he thought about it, he was naturally very happy. Xiao Wang and Xiao Lu left after sending the car over. Then, Chen Shi's family of 3 and his sister-in-law sat in one car, and the elders sat in another. The whole family went straight to Earth Temple in a grandiose manner. Temple fairs were considered a traditional folk activity in Wuxia. Every New Year, many places in Shangjing would hold temple fairs. In fact, temple fairs were quite similar to market fairs. However, temple fairs would be interspersed with various performances, mainly to worship customs and celebrate festivals. Markets, on the other hand, were purely commercial activities. Hohai was less than 5 kilometers away from Earth Temple. Normally, it would take half an hour to drive to Earth Temple, but today, it only took a few minutes. After parking the car, the whole family walked into Earth Temple in a grandiose manner. Today, Earth Temple was very lively. There were rows of red lanterns hanging outside, and there was a lion dance performance at the entrance. The people on both sides of the street gathered in circles. It was really a noisy scene. There was a sea of people, and it was a lively scene. Chapter 203. Going to the temple fair during the Spring Festival was an old custom that the people of Shangjing had followed for many years. The Earth Temple Fair was only held for 8 days, but in these short 8 days, it received more than 1 million visitors, which was really lively. Each temple fair had its own special performances, and the Earth Temple Fair performed the Qing Dynasty Palace ritual. This ritual would strictly follow the worship process of the Qianlong Emperor, and the costumes and props were also made according to the historical records, so that the people could see how the emperor worshipped the earth. The ticket for the temple fair was only 10 yuan, so compared to going to the mall and watching a movie, it was actually a very down-to-earth entertainment. Usually, a large family of men and women of all ages came together, not to buy anything, but simply to stroll around. It was very happy to squeeze together and watch the fun. 6 adults and 1 child walked with a cat. Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang walked in the front, while Qin Ruing and Qin Xueqing walked side by side. The 2 sisters hadn't talked for a long time, and now they were together whispering something. Chen Shi and Wang Chuanju were walking together, while the little fellow was lying on Wang Chuanju's shoulder, holding a windmill in her hand. Looking at the bustling scene of people jostling shoulder to shoulder, she was very happy. The family came out to stroll, so naturally, they had to chat on the road. Sure enough, after walking for a while, Wang Chuanju turned her head and looked at Chen Shi with a smile. She casually said, "You are Yingying's husband. If I call you my nephew's husband, it always feels a bit awkward. How about I call you Little Chen, what do you think?" Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled and replied, "Second aunt, you are too polite. You are an elder, so you can call me whatever you want." "Well, then don't blame me for taking advantage of my seniority and putting on the airs of an elder in front of you." "Why would I?" "Second aunt, you are joking." "Huh." The 2 of them chatted awkwardly for a while. At this time, the little fellow saw a barbecue skewers stall nearby, so she shouted to eat barbecue skewers. "Papa, I want to eat that. Meat, meat." Gluttonous baby smelled the aroma of the barbecued meat, and his saliva almost flowed out. Thus, Chen Shi went to buy a few mutton skewers for her. When Chen Shi bought the meat skewers for her and the little girl was eating them, Wang Chuanju suddenly asked in a seemingly casual manner, "Little Chen, has Ming Qing ever told you about the Wu Lian?" "Yes, I did." Chen Shi nodded. He already knew what Wang Chuanju wanted to say to him. After all, Chen Shi had heard how Xiao Wang addressed Qin Yongyan and Wang Chuanju when he was delivering the car. Secretary Qin, Director Wang. The administrative levels of Wuxia could be divided into 5 levels: national level, provincial level, departmental level, county level, and township level. The Director General was a department-level official, equivalent to an ordinary mayor of a prefecture-level city, or the head of a provincial public security department or the head of a provincial education department. From this, it could be seen that Qin Yongwang's status in Wulian was really not low. At least, he was at the level of Shintaro Abe. Celestial beings were really too eye-catching. Because of Qin Ring, Chen Shi was related to his sister-in-law's family, and their family was the backbone of the Wulian. Now, naturally, they wanted to pull Chen Shi into the Wulian. The word relationship was a very magical existence in the eyes of Westerners. Because there was no corresponding translation of this word in other languages, they specially invented an English word, guanxi, China-style relationship. A simple example could be given. Once the people of Wuxia were in trouble, the first thing they would think of was not a lawyer, but an acquaintance. Through their acquaintances and friends, they could get in touch with the government to solve the problem. The word relationship represented many meanings, and there were many usages. The word itself was a neutral word. How to use it, where to use it, and whether it was appropriate to use it. This was why it carried both positive and negative meanings. Not long ago, his sister-in-law asked Chen Shi if he was willing to join the Wulian. Today, Wang Chuanju did the same thing again. It was foreseeable that if Chen Shi still did not agree today, then Qin Yongwang, or even Qin Yongyan, might come forward to invite him to join the Wulian. If that still did not work, then Qin Ruoying would probably have to come forward and persuade him. This was probably the so-called people in Jiang who have no choice. As long as Chen Shi still had concerns in his heart, then he could not ignore some things in this world. Join the Wulian? It was still the same words, not considering. It was not that he disliked the Wulian. He simply found it troublesome. There was no free lunch in this world. The Wulian could not support a group of people without doing anything. Chen Shi was now used to being lazy. Except for his wife and children, he really did not want to run errands for others. Apart from not wanting to run errands for others, he also didn't have any desire to compete for the throne. So now, as long as he could stay by the hotbed every day and laugh with his wife as they watched the little one grow up day by day, he was already very satisfied. The little fellow did not know that her father was so unambitious. After eating a skewer, she suddenly thought of Chen Shi, so she handed one of the skewers to Chen Shi and grinned. "Papa, the skewers are delicious. Gitu. Good girl, good girl. She took the skewer from the little fellow with a smile and ate it. The little fellow turned to ask Wang Chuanju if she wanted to try, but Wang Chuanju shook her head with a smile and then wiped her mouth with a tissue. Wang Chuanju did not speak, but her attention was always on Xianxia. She felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by her. On second thought, instead of being remembered by the Wu Lian like this, it was better to take this opportunity to make it clear to them. So she looked at Wang Chuanju and said to her directly, "The reason why you want me to join the Wu Lian is that you want to use me to deter other forces, right?" "Well, you can think of it that way." Wang Chuanju nodded. When she was about to say something, she did not give her a chance to speak at all. Instead, he continued, "Then you can announce to the public that I have joined the Wu Lian. Anyway, I can't jump out and expose you, right?" "How can that be? You are a celestial being. If you are willing to join the Wu Lian, you should be treated accordingly." "I don't need any special treatment, so I won't join the Wu Lian." Hearing Xi's resolute answer, Wang Chuanju could not help showing a trace of disappointment in her eyes, although she had been prepared for it. What a pity! However, just as Wang Chuanju was feeling disappointed, she said with a smile, "How about this? If the Wu Lian has any problems that can't be solved, I can be a guest, but only once. What do you think?" Hearing this, Wang Chuanju's eyes lit up. She smiled and said, "Promise?" "It's a deal." In fact, this was not a simple conversation between an aunt and a niece, but a direct conversation between a Wu Lian and a celestial being. The meaning of this promise was not simple. Chapter 204. The temple fair was crowded with people, and the sound of gongs and drums filled the sky. It was a festive scene. For the Wuxia people, the significance of the Spring Festival was extraordinary. The Spring Festival was also a holiday, but this long holiday was different from the Mid-Autumn Festival, the Dragon Boat Festival, and the National Day. Because only during this period, people could let go of their social identities, no longer bosses, employees, or students, but fathers, mothers, or children. Their social identities were temporarily invalid, and they had to rush home no matter where they were, just to be able to have a good new year with their families. The conversation between the two was quite pleasant. After reaching a consensus with a few simple words, Wang Chuanju stopped talking about business with Xianxia and talked about the education of the little fellow. Xianxia had already made up her mind to wait until September next year before sending the little guy to kindergarten for big classes. At that time, she was 5 years old. After adapting to kindergarten for a year, she was just at the age of primary school. The timing was just right. The little fellow was now very clever. When the adults spoke, she would listen to them. It didn't matter if she didn't understand. Once she heard something that she could understand, she would immediately express her opinion. For example, when she heard the sensitive word kindergarten, the little fellow immediately pouted and shouted, "I don't want to go to kindergarten." In the past, she was lonely and had no one to accompany her. Now, under the leadership of the two brothers, she had completely let go of herself, so she would rather die than go to kindergarten again. The little fellow sat in Wang Chuanju's arms and twisted her buttocks. Seeing this, Wang Chuanju comforted her with a smile. "Oh, if you say you don't want to go, then don't go. Grandma is so nice." The family strolled around Daitan Park for the whole morning. When it was time for lunch, Qin Yong Wang took everyone to know. B16 at the north gate of Daitan Park. B16, Hepingli Central Street, was a high-end club, similar to the Binjiang Club, but far better than the Binjiang Club. If the Binjiang Club represented business, then no. B16 represented power. It was originally a royal garden called Jifanjiwen, which was under the jurisdiction of Daitan Park and covered an area of nearly 10,000 square meters. At first, the project approval was in the name of building office space in Daitan Park. However, after the construction, it suddenly changed and directly became a gathering place for the rich and powerful. No. B16 Club. This kind of fraudulent operation was simply not something that ordinary people could imagine. Therefore, even though Daitan Park received millions of visitors a year, few people knew that this imperial garden, which was only a wall away from Daitan Park, was actually the most high-end private club in Shangjing. Gate B16 was the highest-grade gate with red paint and gold nails. There was only one staff member in the park's security uniform standing outside the gate. If it were an ordinary tourist, they would probably think that this place was not open to the public and that it was some kind of museum or research institute. Qin Yongwang handed over a card. After the staff took a look at it, they bowed to him respectfully and opened the door. The door was only opened halfway. After Qin Shi and his family walked through the door, the staff quickly closed the door. Where the emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties once reigned, the merchants of the present day gathered at the altar. Without going out of the city, one can enjoy the beauty of mountains and rivers. While staying in the bustling city, one can enjoy the beauty of the woods and springs. Standing behind the gate and looking around, one could see the palace rooms, corridor pavilions, pond pavilions, climbing corridors, rockery, and so on in the garden. The Qing dynasty relics in the garden, such as Jingguang Hall and Jinghe Hall, as well as the Xianxia Hall on the inner wall of the north side of Daitan Park, reflected a strong palace style. Now, these buildings had all become private rooms of the B16 Club. The family had just walked through the gate, and before they had time to look around, two young women in cheongsams came over. They first paid their respects to Qin Yongwang, who was the leader of the group. Then, they led the group of people into the garden. Along the way, the feeling was like being in the palace of the Qing dynasty. The surrounding ancient buildings had been carefully renovated. All of them were gilded and painted with color, with corner tiles and eaves. When they passed by the parking lot, Qin Shi also noticed a small detail. The license plates of all the cars here were covered with cloth covers. It could be said that this was a meticulous service. The two women in cheongsams led the family around the garden for a while. After passing through the garden and crossing the stone bridge, they walked into a private room. The private room was very large, about 100 square meters. The decoration in the hall was decorated with dragons and phoenixes as the theme. It was decorated with large colored palace lanterns, bright yellow tablecloths, napkins, and chair covers. The tableware was made of porcelain and silver that imitated the Qing dynasty. Looking at this posture, it was estimated that they wanted the guests to experience the feeling of the emperor eating. After the family sat down, Qin Yongyan first looked around, then pointed at Qin Yongwang and said jokingly, "You, corrupt official, a very corrupt official." Hearing this, Qin Yongwang hurriedly waved his hand and smiled. "Don't accuse me of being a corrupt official. This membership card was given to me by the boss here. It's rare for me to come here. You see, it's New Year. Our family should have a good meal, right? Oh, then it's thanks to you." The two of them joked a few words. In fact, these materialistic things were of no importance to the few people present. The only reason they came here to eat was because of the novelty. In this kind of place, what they ate was not the taste, but the environment and service. Not to mention the environment, this place was definitely the best in the country. As for the service level, it could be seen from the number of people. There was a woman in a cheongsam standing in each of the four corners of the private room, and there were two waiters. There were only 7 people in Qin Shi's family, but there were 6 waiters here. Moreover, it was the spring festival. The dishes were served very quickly. In less than 20 minutes, the table was full of dishes. Wang Chuanju served the little fellow and tasted a few of them. She pursed her lips and carefully recalled the taste. Then she commented, "It's not as good as what Papa cooked." Nonsense, her father was in the semi-god realm. Cooking was like shooting a rocket. The amount of salt he put in had to be precise to 2 decimal places. How could the dishes not be delicious? The quality of the food here was so high, so the taste would naturally not be bad. The little fellow was really making things difficult for others. The whole family laughed happily as they ate. Qin Yongyan didn't like outsiders watching him while he was eating, so he asked the waiters to leave. However, not long after the waiters left, there was a sudden knock on the door of the private room. After Qin Yongyan asked to come in, a man who looked about 30 or 40 years old came in. The man was holding a glass of red wine. After briefly glancing at the people in the room, he went directly to Qin Yongwang and said to him with a smile, "Secretary Qin, Director Wang, I just heard that you were eating here, so I wanted to come and give you a New Year's greeting." Do you mind if I come uninvited? After hearing the man's words, Qin Yongwang stood up and replied with a smile, Mr. Wu, you're welcome. As he spoke, he picked up his glass and gently clinked it with Mr. Wu's. Chapter 205. Young Master Wu's full name was Wu Hui, and he ran some unknown businesses in Shangjing. He was involved in many industries, such as finance, real estate, energy, film, internet, and so on. Anything that could make money, young Master Wu definitely had a share in it. Wu Hui's business was very big, but he usually didn't run it under his own name, so there were very few people who really knew his name. For example, business moguls like Ning Zhonghua and Zhou Haisheng who started from scratch. Although they were rich, that was all there was to it. In China, money was not the only thing that mattered. The Chinese language was broad and profound, and the term young master in ancient times generally referred to scholars or young men from wealthy families. In the past, this term was a form of respect and a compliment. But in modern times, the term young master seemed to have a derogatory connotation, just like the 4 young masters of the capital. Just like the term emperor, anyone could joke and say that they were the emperor, but in the past, it would be a crime punishable by death. The so-called 4 young masters of the capital, in the eyes of people like Wu Hui, were actually similar to clowns, insects that could be trampled to death with 1 foot. How could a few nouveau riches be worthy of the title of 4 young masters of the capital? Of course, disdain was disdain, but Wu Hui wouldn't bother with ordinary people for no reason. Because they didn't have contact with them, many people's understanding of the second generation of rich and powerful people might be one-sided, thinking that they were all mud that couldn't support the wall. As the saying goes, dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and mice give birth to sons that know how to dig holes. In reality, most of the second generation were very outstanding. After all, their parents were very outstanding, and the education that these second generation received from a young age was far better than ordinary people, so in terms of personal quality, cultivation, and knowledge, the outstanding second generation could be said to be dragons and phoenixes among men. As for the nouveau riches like Li Tian'er and Yao Jiasin, who caused a huge sensation in society, they could only be compared to ordinary people. If they were placed in the real circle of second generation, this kind of trash wouldn't even have the qualifications to carry shoes for others. Wu Hui had shares in B16, so the waiter told him about the arrival of Qin Yongwang's family. Qin Yongwang took a glass of juice and clinked it with Wu Hui, then introduced his family to him one by one. When it was Qin-shi's turn, before Qin Yongwang could introduce him, Wu Hui laughed and said, "This? Could you be Mr. Qin?" Hearing this, Qin-shi stood up with the juice in his hand. He nodded and said, "Hello. Hello. I've heard a lot about Mr. Qin." I didn't expect Mr. Qin to be so much younger than I thought. After confirming Qin-shi's identity, Wu Hui immediately lowered his posture. When they clinked glasses, he deliberately lowered his glass to give Qin-shi enough face. However, this seemingly polite action of his attracted Qin Yongwang's attention. Although it was said that the Hua sedan chair was always carried by people, and the brothers on the Imperial Golden List were ranked first. But no matter what, Wu Hui was still a 3rd generation of the Red Army, and his age was also a few years older than Qin-shi. Therefore, according to common sense, there was no reason for him to lower his status in front of Qin-shi. Something was strange. Wu Hui politely toasted everyone in the room. Even the little girl raised her glass of juice and clinked glasses with him. Then, Qin Yongwang invited him to take a seat. After he sat down, Qin Yongwang did not beat around the bush. He directly asked the question in his heart, "Mr. Wu, today is the first day of the new year. Why aren't you celebrating the new year with your family? Why are you here instead?" Hearing this, Wu Hui did not hide it. He smiled and said, "Director Qin, it's not a coincidence that I met your family here today. In fact, I came here after I received the news." For Mr. Qin. As soon as he said this, Qin-shi suddenly became the focus of the room. Even Qin Ruoying was a little confused. When did Qin-shi get in touch with Wu Hui, who represented the new generation of power in Wuxia? For me, not only was Qin Ruoying confused, but even Xianxia himself was confused. Therefore, he immediately asked, "Mr. Wu, this is the first time we've met. I'm a little confused by your words." "Mr. Chen, it's true that this is the first time we've met, but I've been fascinated by you for a long time." Wu Hui looked at Xianxia meaningfully and finally said the purpose of his visit. "Actually, I came here today to ask for a favor. Not only am I representing myself, but I'm also representing my father." "Go ahead." After hearing Wu Hui's serious words, Xianxia did not feel anything, so he casually nodded. However, the more Qin Yongwang listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. The expression on his face could not help but become more serious. At this time, the smile on Wu Hui's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Xianxia and said solemnly, "My grandfather's physical condition is getting worse and worse. I heard that Mr. Chen has the ability to understand the world, so I took the liberty to come here today to disturb you. I only hope that Mr. Chen can save my grandfather." After that, Wu Hui got up and bowed respectfully to Xianxia. The reason why he was so polite in front of Xianxia was actually not because of Xianxia's identity as a celestial being, but because the king of hell was worried. How many powerful second generations were there in Wuxia? After careful calculation, it was actually not far from the truth. There were 7 senior officials, 72 deputy national officials, at least 270 senior officials, and at least 1,700 deputy ministers. These people formed the pyramid of power in Wuxia. Only their children could be called the real second generation of power. A civilian like Li Danjiang, who enjoyed the treatment of a major general through singing, was nothing in front of these leaders with real power. Wu Hui was also one of the most outstanding people among the second generation of the Quan family. However, the reason why the Wu family was so prosperous now was not because of his father, but because of his grandfather. Although the old man had been retired for a long time, his connections were still there. As long as old man Wu did not pass away, the Wu family would be able to live in Shangjing and even Wuxia for a day longer. Wu Hui's father was called Wu Ying. He was 62 years old this year, and happened to be stuck at a very awkward time. Here, it had to be mentioned that Wuxia's chaotic retirement system had to be mentioned. When the new party congress was held, only people under the age of 67, including 67, were eligible to become members of the new Politburo. And those over the age of 67, regardless of their ability or political achievements, were all treated as retirees. If anything happened to old man Wu in these 2 years, then Wu Ying was likely to stay in his current position until he retired. Perhaps he would be promoted again, but what awaited Wu Ying would be the vice chairman of the National People's Congress, or other similar positions. They were all at the deputy national level, but in reality, these positions were not as good as the senior officials with real power. Although they were promoted, they were actually demoted. Even if they were promoted, they would only retire to the second level. Not to mention Wu Ying, even Wu Hui could not accept this situation. If Wu Ying could not pass this hurdle, then the Wu family's current glory would disappear with the old man's passing. Chapter 206. Yama's Sorrow, Yama's Sorrow. If Yama wanted someone to die at midnight, he could keep them alive until dawn. Legend had it that a single pill of Yama's Sorrow could bring the dead back to life. It had the miraculous effect of reviving the dead. Although Wu Hui also felt that this was an exaggeration, he was now like a drowning man desperately trying to grasp at the last straw. Therefore, he roughly explained the Wu family's current predicament at the dinner table. There was nothing shameful about this. As long as she could let Elder Wu live for 2 more years and hold on until Wu Ying successfully crossed the threshold, then the Wu family would be able to maintain their current status. Once she agreed, then this favor would really be a life-saving grace for the Wu family. Wu Hui was very smart, so he didn't mention anything about remuneration from beginning to end. Instead, he kept pleading very sincerely, "Mr. Chen, please save my grandfather." The Wu family will always remember this great kindness in their hearts. It was the new year, and the family could still encounter this kind of thing. She pondered for a moment, then frowned and asked, "How old is your grandfather today?" 84. He doesn't have any serious illness, right? Only old illnesses like high blood pressure and gout. It's probably because he injured his roots on the battlefield. The old man's old, and his body can't take it anymore. Recently, his mental state has been getting worse and worse, and he doesn't even have the energy to get out of bed, so Wu Hui didn't finish his words. However, the meaning behind his words was very simple. Although the old man wasn't seriously ill, he was nearing the end of his life. Death was an illness that couldn't be cured. After all, a person's life was limited. When a person faced a natural death, they would always be aware of it beforehand. Therefore, many old people would call their children home before they died, and let their children wash and change their clothes for them. After taking one last look at their children and grandchildren, they would close their eyes and pass away peacefully and naturally as if they were asleep. They had never suffered the torture of illness before, and they would pass away peacefully in their sleep. Therefore, to the people of Wuxia, dying of old age was a blessing, a great blessing. After all, Elder Wu was an old man who had walked through the war years. He had experienced ups and downs and enjoyed the prosperity of the world. Now that he was nearing the end of his life, it should have been a joyous occasion. Unfortunately, this was not the right time. If the old man passed away at such a critical moment, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the Wu family. It was a nightmare. Just a little more. Once the old man passed away, how could Wu Ying advance further? What Wuxia did not lack the least was talent. There were plenty of competitors who had the same qualifications and abilities as Wu Ying, and some were even older than him. As the saying goes, the tea cools down when the person is gone. These things were top secret. The fact that Wu Hui was willing to reveal the old master's condition in front of everyone meant that he saw Xianxia as his last hope. Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju glanced at each other before they started to eat. This was a very important matter, so the moment Wu Hui finished speaking, Qin Yongwang glanced at Wang Chuanju and started to eat silently. Qin Yongyan was dressed in white. Qin Ring didn't understand the situation, and Qin Xueqing was completely uninterested. Everyone was waiting for Qin Shi's answer. The only one who could laugh at such a time was obviously the little girl. She picked up her chopsticks, clumsily picked up a piece of fatty meat, and handed it to Qin Shi. Then she said seriously, "Papa, I'll treat you to it." The little girl didn't eat fatty meat because she felt that it was too stuffy, so she hated fatty meat very much. She didn't eat it, but she could give it to Papa. The little brat had learned how to be naughty. Qin Shi turned to look at her, reached out and rubbed her head. Then he opened his mouth and swallowed the fatty meat on her chopsticks. After seeing Qin Shi swallow the fatty meat, the little girl clapped her hands and giggled, "Papa is so awesome." Her clear childish voice sounded in the private room, which was particularly ear-piercing. Qin Shi glanced at Wu Hui thoughtfully, but saw that there was no change on his face, which made Qin Shi think more highly of him. Therefore, he didn't beat around the bush. After motioning the little girl to be quiet, Qin Shi turned to look at Wu Hui and asked very calmly, "Mr. Wu, I don't know if you have heard of the saying, life and death are predestined and can't be changed." Hearing this, Wu Hui's face changed greatly. In a moment of excitement, he even accidentally knocked over the wine glass on the table. Life and death are predestined and can't be changed. This sentence was said by Zhuge Liang when Wei Yan stepped on his life lamp. How could Wu Hui not know? Zhuge Liang went out of Mount Qi 6 times and exhausted his efforts. Finally, he set up the 7-star life-extending lamp in Wuzhang Plain in an attempt to change his fate. However, because Wei Yan accidentally knocked over his life lamp, all his efforts were wasted, and he died with regret. The reason why Sima Yi had the last laugh was not because he was stronger than Zhuge Liang, but because he had lived for a long time. He dragged Zhuge Liang to death and exhausted 3 generations of the Wei Kingdom's monarchs. All the enemies who could compete with him were dead. Naturally, the Sima family could achieve great things. In terms of survival ability, Sima Yi was the best in the world. Old Master Wu was not Sima Yi, but Zhuge Liang, so Wu Hui stood in place and couldn't help but clench his fists. In the end, he was still a little unwilling, so he asked in a slightly trembling voice, "Mr. Qin, you really don't have a way?" 1 year, Grandpa only needs 1 year. Qin Shi shook his head slightly, then took out 3 energy pills from his bag and put them on the round table. After slowly turning the energy pills in front of Wu Hui, Xianxia said calmly, "This is the legendary Yama's Cho. In fact, you should know that the Jianghu's rumors can't be trusted. After all, this medicine is not the life fruit of the grand deity Zhenyuan. It can cure diseases, but it can't change fate. You can take it back and let the old man try it. It should improve his mental state, but I still say the same thing, life and death are predestined and can't be changed. Young Master Wu, I'm very sorry." Wu Hui stared at the 3 pills in front of him in a daze. This was the Yama's Cho he had been dreaming of, but Xianxia's words completely extinguished the hope in his heart. After spitting out a mouthful of turbid air, Wu Hui used a tissue to carefully wrap up the 3 pills. Then he solemnly bowed to Xianxia and said, "Thank you, Mr. Chen." After that, he turned and left the room without even saying goodbye to Qin Yongwang. Perhaps it was because they empathized with Wu Hui's feelings, so the atmosphere in the room became a little strange. After Wu Hui left, Qin Ruoying looked at Xianxia thoughtfully, then asked in a low voice, "You really don't have a way?" Hearing that, Xianxia smiled and shook his head, not answering her question. Zhuge Liang wasn't the only one who knew how to use the 7-star life-prolonging lamp. Zhuge Liang failed, but another person succeeded. That person was Liu Bowen. Zhuge Liang divided the world, Liu Bowen unified the country. Liu Bowen was the #1 strategist of the Great Ming Dynasty. He followed Zhu Yuanzhang to wipe out the warlords and expel the Tatars. After many years of fighting, he realized that his life was coming to an end, so he used the 7-star life-prolonging lamp to extend his life by 12 years. Only then was he able to help Zhu Yuanzhang unify the world and recover the Han people's country. To put it bluntly, it wasn't that Xianxia didn't have a way, but that he didn't want to. There were too many implications, and it couldn't be explained in a few words. The title of Yama's Cho was made by Ning Zhonghua, so today, it was up to him to personally destroy this title. The previous chapter has been censored, and I don't know when it will be released. Let's leave it at that. Friends who haven't read it can wait a few days, when the editor goes to work. I won't write about these sensitive topics in the future. Chapter 207. Wuxia was too big, and there were too many people. What happened to Wu Hui's family was not uncommon in the officialdom. The Great Han Empire and the Great Tang Empire, which used to be extremely powerful, would also collapse one day. Compared to them, what was the Wu family? Life and death were fated and could not be changed. As the supreme ruler of the world, the emperors of each dynasty held the power of life and death in their hands. They sat on 3,000 beauties, ate all kinds of delicacies, and wore all kinds of silk. But in the end, they all pursued the same thing, immortality. If Xianxia promised Wu Hui today to extend old Master Wu's life and help the Wu family out of this predicament, then, the threshold of the courtyard would probably be trampled flat by people who came to ask for medicine. Wu Hui's sudden departure seemed to have diluted the festive atmosphere. It was supposed to be a happy time for family reunion, but now everyone was silent. Qin Yongyan first looked at Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju, then turned to look at Xianxia. Only then did he pick up the juice and smiled at the little girl. "Nian Nian, Grandpa taught you a poem. Do you want to learn it?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and asked, "Poem? Grandpa, what is a poem?" "It's the same as a poem. Have you recited a poem?" "Yes. Papa taught me to recite poems before." When it came to poems, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Perhaps she wanted to show off, so before Qin Yongyan said anything, she took the initiative to recite it. Goose, 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 curving its neck to the sky. White feathers floating on the green water, red palms plucking the clear waves. This was what Xianxia taught her in Kangju district. He did not expect her to remember and recite it so fluently. Her performance won her applause from the audience. The family laughed and praised the little girl for being smart, which made her feel a little embarrassed. Seeing his daughter so smart, Xianxia also felt proud, so he could not help but reach out and pinch her little face, which made the little girl pout on the spot. "Papa, you're so annoying. Even the little one knows how to be shy." With her interruption, the atmosphere in the private room became much livelier. At this time, Qin Yongyan chuckled and said, "Ninian, lyrics are like poems. Do you want to learn?" The little guy's performance in reciting the poem had won the cheers of the entire hall. This made her extremely proud, so she immediately nodded and replied, "Yes." "All right, then listen carefully." Qin Yongyan stood up and his entire aura suddenly changed. It was as if he had come to the riverside and was looking at the torrential river. He passionately chanted, "My name is Qin Yongyan. The rolling Yangtze River flows eastward, and the waves wash away all heroes. Right and wrong, success and failure are gone in the blink of an eye. The green hills are still there, and the sunset is still red." White-haired fisherman and woodcutter on the riverside, accustomed to the autumn moon and spring breeze. A pot of turbid wine was a happy reunion. So many things from the past to the present are just jokes. So many things from the past to the present were all jokes. After hearing this, Qin Yongwang couldn't help but tilt his head and look at Wang Chuanju. He instantly understood what Qin Yongyan wanted to express. He didn't really want to teach the little guy to recite the poem. He just wanted to use this as an excuse to express his opinion on this matter. Compared to Qin Yongyan and Qin Shi's leisurely and complacent appearance, the couple's performance was indeed a bit too utilitarian. They were both martial artists, but because they had been in the Wu Lian government for a long time, they naturally couldn't avoid being contaminated with some official habits. However, this point was extremely detrimental to their martial arts cultivation. Qin Yongyan was giving them pointers. Everyone was smart, so there was no need to say anything. Just a little pointers would be enough. This song, Riverside Immortal, was the theme song of the 1994 version of The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The little guy still hadn't watched The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so this song was a bit too difficult for her to pronounce. Thus, after she rolled around for a long time, she found that she couldn't even remember the first line. Immediately, she pouted unhappily and shrank back into the chair. "I can't recite it. I'm not going to recite it." Chen Shi was afraid that she would be deeply affected, so he quickly smiled and comforted her. "Ninian, be good. It's not your fault that you can't recite it. Don't be discouraged. This song is really too difficult. When you go to school in the future, you will naturally recite it." Hearing this, the little guy still looked unhappy. She turned her head and didn't talk to Qin Shi. Her cute little appearance immediately made everyone laugh. Having a little one at home was like having a treasure. The little guy was now the happy fruit of the family. Her every frown and smile could affect the mood of the whole family. After lunch, the family left B16 and then drove to the bird's nest, ready to take the little guy there to ski. The bird's nest was happy during the ice and snow season. In fact, it was similar to the Shikahai ice rink, except that one was a frozen lake that turned into an ice rink, and the other was a snowy gymnasium that turned into a ski rink. There were only a few entertainment projects. The bird's nest had it, and the Shikahai also had it, but the little guy still had a lot of fun. She was now enjoying the supreme treatment. The whole family revolved around her. If she wanted something, she only needed to open her mouth. Naturally, her father or grandmother would run errands for her. This little guy was really spoiled to the sky. This spring festival was quite fulfilling. After the first day of the new year, in the next few days, the whole family drove around the capital to play. The whole family was mobilized just to make her have more fun. When the two brothers came back, they didn't know how the little guy would show off to them. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, it was the 5th day of the new year. Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju were the senior cadres of the Wu Lian. After a spring festival, there were still a lot of things waiting for them to go back to deal with. Therefore, they could only say goodbye to the little guy with slight regret. After a few days of getting along, the little guy had already recognized Wang Chuanju as her great-uncle and grandmother. Now that she heard that she was leaving, she immediately showed a reluctant look. Just as the little guy and Wang Chuanju were lovey-dovey and unwilling to part, Qin Xueqing suddenly found Qin Shi. "The set of skills you taught me, can I teach my parents?" Although the sister-in-law's cultivation time was short, she had already tasted the sweetness of it. No matter what, she was still a daughter. Naturally, she wanted to show filial piety to her parents as soon as she had something good. Hearing this, Xianxia nodded. No matter what, they were still a family. Naturally, he couldn't be stingy. However, this set of skills was after all an immortal cultivator's skill. If it was spread out, it would definitely cause a huge impact on the existing cultivation system on Earth. It might even affect the existing social order on Earth. Such an outcome was obviously not what Xianxia wanted to see. Therefore, he could only use hints to warn his sister-in-law to keep it a secret. After Grandpa and Grandma left, the little guy was a little sad. However, Xianxia's words immediately made her eyes light up. Chapter 208. Go to Chengdu to see Grandma. This suggestion was very tempting for the little girl. The little girl had a good impression of Chengdu. Although she didn't like Kai Shu-Qin, her grandma was there. Therefore, after hearing Xianxia's suggestion, the little girl immediately jumped up and shouted excitedly, "I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma. I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma." The family of 3 was standing outside the courtyard to send Qin Yongwang and his wife off. The little girl's sudden shout even startled Qin Yongwang and his wife, who had already walked to the entrance of the alley. While they were sending their grandparents off, she was already shouting about looking for Grandma. This was the reason why Xianxia didn't often mention Aunt Zhang. The little girl always listened to the wind and rain. Once she had an idea, she couldn't take it back. After sending Qin Yongwang and his wife off, Xianxia and his family returned to the West Wing and began to pack their luggage. During this time, Xianxia even asked his sister-in-law if she wanted to go to Chengdu with them, but his sister-in-law decisively refused. The family's general mobilization during the Spring Festival had already delayed a lot of time. Now that they were finally free, she naturally had to work overtime to cultivate and rush back. Therefore, after the family of 3 simply packed, Xianxia booked the plane tickets online. Shangjing to Chengdu. In 2 days, it would be the peak period to return to the city. Shangjing to Chengdu would only cost a few hundred yuan, but Chengdu to Shangjing would cost 3,000 to 4,000 yuan. It might even be impossible to buy a ticket. This was the right time to go to Chengdu. After booking the plane tickets, Xianxia suddenly thought of something. He quickly opened WeChat and sent a video call request to Aunt Zhang. He didn't know how the old lady spent the Spring Festival. If the family of 3 rushed over excitedly and found that Aunt Zhang wasn't in Chengdu, then it would be a wasted trip. As expected, Xianxia sent 2 video calls, but no one answered. Therefore, he had to call Aunt Zhang. Beep, beep, the phone rang for a long time. When Xianxia was about to give up, the phone finally connected. "Hello, is this Brother Qin?" It was not Auntie Zhang's voice, but Xie Pinglin's. He was slightly older than Xianxia, but after the previous incident, Xie Pinglin had indeed learned a lot, so he treated Xianxia as an elder brother. Xie Pinglin called him Brother Qin out of respect from the bottom of his heart. "Yes, it's me. Where's Auntie Zhang? Why didn't she answer the phone?" My mother is sick and hospitalized." Hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but frown. What a joke. Auntie Zhang had already taken his elixir before she left Zhonghai, and the elixir she gave Ning Zhongguo wasn't even the simplified version. It wasn't that Xianxia wanted to boast, but this pill could make Auntie Zhang immune to all kinds of diseases. It wouldn't be a problem for her to live a long life. Now, Xie Pinglin was telling him that Aunt Zhang was hospitalized. Therefore, Xianxia's first reaction was to say, "You kidding? Are you kidding me? What's going on? My mother suddenly fainted the day before yesterday. We sent her to the hospital, and the doctor said that it was very likely that she fainted due to insufficient blood supply to the brain. She needs to be hospitalized for a while to be sure. Is it serious? It shouldn't be a big problem. After she woke up, she just felt very tired, so she had to sleep for a long time every day. Which hospital are you in?" Huaxi, "Okay, I'll call you when I arrive. Keep the phone connected." "Huh? You're coming to Chengdu?" Xie Pinglin was stunned for a moment, then hurriedly said, "My mother should be fine." "Brother Qin, you don't have to make a special trip." Xie Pinglin wanted to say a few polite words to Xianxia and tell him not to worry, but Xianxia hung up the phone. Then, Xianxia briefly told Qin Ruoying about Auntie Zhang's situation. Qin Ruoying didn't know the seriousness of the matter, but when she heard that Auntie Zhang was hospitalized, She was still very nervous, so she quickly carried the little girl and followed Xianxia to the airport in a taxi. It only took 3 hours from Shangjing to Chengdu. When they got off the plane, it was not even 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The family of 3 took a taxi and went straight to Huaxi Hospital. Many shops along the way were not open, and there were only a few scattered cars on the viaduct. Right now, Chengdu looked like an empty city. However, in fact, according to the comprehensive calculation of the National Tourism Administration's data center, the number of tourists received by Sichuan and Chongqing during the Spring Festival this year was the second highest in the country, second only to Yuezhou. As long as it was a holiday, tourist attractions would be full. Places like Chuanxi Road, Jinli, Wuhou Temple, and Wenshu Courtyard were so crowded that the roads were closed. Although there was a place in Chengdu that was not a tourist attraction, it was more lively than a tourist attraction. Moreover, 365 days a year, it was lively every day as if it was the new year. This was Huaxi Hospital. After getting out of the taxi and seeing the dense crowd in front of him, Chen-Shi let the little girl ride on his shoulder while he held Qin Ruoying's hand and squeezed into the hospital. With so many patients, the beds were naturally very tight. When Chen-Shi found Aunt Zhang's bed according to the address given by Xie Pinglin, he was so angry that he frowned. Aunt Zhang's bed was in the aisle. When he left, he had left a total of 1.8 million yuan in cash for Xie Pinglin. In the end, this was how Xie Pinglin treated Aunt Zhang. Xie Pinglin was serving the old lady water, so he did not notice Chen-Shi and his family's arrival. The old lady's mental state was indeed very bad now. Her face was slightly sallow, and there was not much color on her lips. When Qin Ruoying saw her sick appearance, her eyes could not help but turn red. Aunt Zhang drank a mouthful of water. Just as she was about to lie down and continue to rest, she saw the family of 3 standing not far away. She blinked, thinking that she had seen wrongly. Seeing that, Qin Ruoying quickly went forward and sat by Aunt Zhang's bed, holding her hand tightly. Looking at Aunt Zhang, who was half lying in front of her, Qin Ruoying could not help but feel a lump in her throat. She could not help but cry immediately. She had not seen Aunt Zhang for many years. Unexpectedly, the old lady was already lying on the bed when they met again. How could Qin Ruoying not feel sad? Aunt Zhang had watched her grow up, and she had also watched Aunt Zhang grow old day by day. Aunt, what's wrong with you? Why are you so sick? Silly child, I'm fine. My body is fine. Look at you, why are you crying? Isn't it inauspicious? Come, wipe your tears. Aunt Zhang smiled as she pulled a tissue from the bedside and handed it to Qin Ruoying. After Qin Ruoying wiped her tears, Aunt Zhang patted the back of her hand, indicating that she did not need to worry. Then, Aunt Zhang turned her head to look at the little girl in Chen-Shi's arms. Good granddaughter, come to grandma. The little girl was sitting in Chen-Shi's arms, pouting as she looked at Aunt Zhang, who was lying on the bed. Chapter 209. Although the smell of disinfectant was strong in the corridor of the hospital, there seemed to be an irrepressible stench in the air. The corridor was bustling with activity. Although there were many people, everyone was trying their best not to make too much noise. After all, it was an unlucky place. Sadness and sadness were the main theme here. The back of the bed could be raised. Instead of saying that Aunt Zhang was lying on the bed, it was better to say that she was leaning on the bed. When the little girl saw her grandmother's sickly appearance, she immediately lay in her grandmother's arms and cried out sadly. When Aunt Zhang saw this, she immediately patted her little head and comforted her very kindly. Oh, my good granddaughter, what's wrong? Who bullied you? Tell Grandma will stand up for you. Hearing this, the little girl's eyes turned red. She said with an aggrieved face, Grandma, don't be sick. I don't want you to be sick. All right, Grandma is not sick. Aunt Zhang took out a tissue and wiped the little girl's face. Then, she pinched her little face and comforted her. Good girl, don't cry. Look at how many people are here, and you're still crying here. Don't you feel embarrassed? The little girl turned her head and glanced at both sides of the corridor. When she saw that many people were looking at them, she immediately sniffled a little embarrassedly. Then she threw herself into Aunt Zhang's arms and hugged her tightly. Just when the little girl and Aunt Zhang were being lovey-dovey, Xianxia came to Xie Pinglin's side. He patted Xie Pinglin's shoulder and walked to the side. When Xie Pinglin came over, Xianxia asked directly, "What did the doctor say?" "They did a Doppler examination in the morning. The report is just out. I've asked the doctor. The doctor said that acute cerebral blood supply is very common in the elderly. It's not a big problem. She just needs to pay more attention to her diet and rest. Is that so?" Xianxia pondered for a while. Then he looked at Aunt Zhang's bed and asked rather unhappily, "Are there no more beds in the hospital? Why did they arrange for her to be in the corridor?" There were several types of beds in the hospital. The most common ones were a 7-person room, a 3-person room, a double room, and a single room. As for the aisles, usually only patients with limited beds or financial difficulties would stay there. In the past 2 years, the housing prices in Chengdu had risen particularly fast. The prices in the Third Ring Road had exceeded 10,000, and the prices in the South Gate were as high as 20 to 30,000. However, Xianxia had not given Xie Pinglin 1 million, but 1,800,000. The money was more than enough to buy a house with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room. Moreover, Xie Pinglin and his wife had some savings. If Xie Pinglin really wanted to mistreat his own mother, Xianxia could only apologize to him. However, the real situation was not what Xianxia imagined. When Xie Pinglin heard Xianxia's question, he couldn't help but look at his expression. After realizing that Xianxia seemed to be a little angry, Xie Pinglin quickly explained, "It's not that there aren't enough beds, and it's not that I don't want to spend money. It's just that my mom doesn't agree. Originally, I arranged a double room for her, but after my mom woke up, she felt that there was nothing wrong with her. She was afraid that it would be a waste, so she insisted that the nurse move her to the aisles. She wouldn't listen no matter how I persuaded her. Since she didn't want to, I had no choice but to let it be." Speaking of this, Xie Pinglin was also quite depressed. In fact, the hospital bed fee was not too expensive. There were clearly beds in the ward, but as a son, he let his mother stay in the aisles. Therefore, he had been looked down upon by many people these 2 days. "Then it seems that I've misunderstood you. I'm sorry." It's okay. "Brother Chen, you're treating me like an outsider." Xie Pinglin was still the same as before, not good with words. Therefore, Xianxia changed the topic and asked about their recent situation. Their child was still young. Once Aunt Zhang fell ill, there was no one to take care of the child. A place like the hospital was obviously not suitable for children to stay for long, so Kai Shuqin was now at home taking care of the child all day. The two of them chatted for a while. Seeing that Aunt Zhang had coaxed the little guy, Xianxia went to Aunt Zhang's bedside and took her pulse. Aunt Zhang's current situation was indeed similar to what the doctor said. There was no major problem, but her pulse was weak, and her qi and blood were insufficient. She would be fine after a good rest, a regular diet, and more exercise. However, it was precisely because of this that Xianxia felt a little strange. Could it be that his energy cultivation pill was really a fake and inferior product? How long had it been since Aunt Zhang returned to Chengdu? How did this happen? Thinking of this, Xianxia could not help but ask doubtfully, once acute cerebral blood supply deficiency occurs, it will come very suddenly. However, there should be some signs before the onset, such as blurred vision, tinnitus, nausea, cold sweat, and weakness in the limbs. You didn't feel any of these before? Hearing this, Aunt Zhang shook her head and smiled. "No, I'm old. It's normal for some problems to suddenly appear. Previously, we were celebrating the new year at our hometown. I guess it's because we haven't been back for a long time. After I got there, I felt a little unacclimatized and couldn't sleep well. Other than sleep, there were no other problems. The symptoms you mentioned just now, there were none at all. There were no signs." Hearing Aunt Zhang's words, Xianxia was instantly puzzled. It sounded like everything was normal. Thus, after pondering for a while, he continued to ask, "Where is your hometown?" "Rain City." Although Rain City was a prefecture-level city, due to geographical reasons, its economic development was very slow. It could not even compare to some of the coastal towns. However, such a small and unremarkable city had once been glorious. During the Republic of China, Rain City was the provincial capital of Xikang Province. Its status was comparable to the current Chengdu. In 1955, the first session of the National People's Congress officially proposed to abolish Xikang Province. Thus, Rain City lost its status as a provincial capital. This place was surrounded by mountains on all sides. The terrain was narrow and it was inconvenient to travel. After Xikang Province was abolished, Rain City's development was greatly affected. It was gradually reduced to an 18th-tier small city. Later on, Rain City finally walked into the eyes of the entire nation again. However, it was because of the 4.20 earthquake in 2013. Rain City? Xianxia thoughtfully repeated the name of this place. Suddenly, a question appeared in his mind. Could it be that there was something wrong with that place? Aunt Zhang was still lying on the hospital bed, so Xianxia did not ask much. The most important thing now was to let the old lady rest well and recover her body. Thus, after feeding Aunt Zhang a simplified version of the energy-enhancing pill, Xianxia went to Huaxi Gold Card Medical Center to apply for a gold card for her in case such a situation happened again. In this day and age, money could make the devil turn millstones, let alone a hospital. The Gold Card Medical Center was located in Huaxi Hospital's headquarters. Ordinary members were 58,000 and advanced members were 200,000. When they entered the hospital, they could enjoy concierge reception, personal care, 5-star hotel rooms, on-site services, and 24 hours of call. After all, Xianxia could not stay in Chengdu for a long period of time. Aunt Zhang was old, so it was better to be prepared for her advanced membership. Chapter 210. Insufficient blood supply to the brain was mostly due to cerebral arteriosclerosis. As people aged, their organ functions would deteriorate, leading to a decline in hematopoietic ability. In addition, the formation of microthrombosis would block the blood vessels and reduce the blood flow. As a result, the brain would have insufficient blood supply to the brain. According to statistics, 80% of people over the age of 80 had insufficient blood supply to the brain. 70% of people over the age of 60 would have some degree of insufficient blood supply to the brain. Since it was caused by the blockage of blood vessels and the decline in hematopoietic ability, the effect of the meridian unblocking pill was obviously much better than the energy pill. Therefore, Xianxia refined a meridian unblocking pill for Aunt Zhang overnight. After the old lady took it, her complexion improved significantly. Aunt Zhang had come from a hard life and wanted to save every needle and thread. Although she knew that Xianxia was rich now, she still insisted on not wasting money. After staying in the Gold Card Center for one night, she insisted on leaving the hospital and going home. When they went home, Xia Pinglin took a taxi alone and walked in front. The family of 3 and Aunt Zhang sat in another car. This finally gave Aunt Zhang a chance to lecture him. The ward in the Gold Card Center was obviously very high class. Staying for one night was similar to staying in a hotel. How wasteful was that? She was not that delicate. How was staying in the aisle shameful? She was not in good spirits yesterday, so when Xianxia forced her to be transferred to another ward, Aunt Zhang did not say anything. Now that she was in good spirits, she naturally lectured Xianxia. She lectured Xianxia until he could not raise his head. In the end, even the little girl could not stand it anymore. She jumped into Aunt Zhang's arms and said coquettishly, "Grandma, Papa cares about you. Don't scold Papa. Oh, Nyan has grown up. You know how to speak up for Papa now." Looking at the little girl's cute appearance, Aunt Zhang could not help but pinch her cheeks. She finally stopped complaining about Xianxia. The so-called traveling was actually going from a place that one was tired of to a place that others were tired of. It was already the 6th day of the Chinese New Year. The traffic in Jinli and Wuhou Temple had decreased significantly. Although there were still many tourists, it was not enough for the traffic police to block the road. The little girl wanted to eat hot pot, but when she saw the long lines of hot pot restaurants along the way, she immediately pouted unhappily. Thus, Auntie Zhang bought the hot pot base from the supermarket and prepared to make a small hot pot for her at home. When the group returned to 262 Wuhou Temple Street, Kai Shuqin was sitting on the sofa watching TV. But this time, when she saw Xianxia and his family enter the door, Kai Shuqin's attitude changed drastically. Before Aunt Zhang could call her, Kai Shuqin stood up and warmly invited Xianxia and his family to take a seat. Then, she excitedly ran to make 2 cups of tea for Xianxia and Qinru. After making tea, Kai Shuqin didn't forget to peel an apple for the little girl. However, Kai Shuqin was very enthusiastic, but the little guy still remembered the grudge. After being ignored by Kai Shuqin last time, the little guy especially disliked this strange aunt. Therefore, when the little guy saw Kai Shuqin about to hand the peeled apple to her, she suddenly turned her head, snorted twice, and climbed from Qin Ruoying's lap to Xianxia's lap. Qin Ruoying was a little confused. After thanking Kai Shuqin very politely, she took the apple and prepared to feed the little guy. But at this time, the little guy was lying in Xianxia's arms. No matter how she called, the little guy was unwilling to raise his head. Kai Shuqin could not find a way out of this situation due to his outburst of anger. After smiling at Xianxia a little awkwardly, Kai Shuqin let Aunt Zhang take care of the child, and she quickly walked to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Xianxia used 1.8 million to solve the conflict in Aunt Zhang's family, and also made Kai Shuqin completely change. After all, the little guy was not a stingy person. She also saw the changes in Kai Shuqin. As a result, during dinner, the little fellow finally stopped giving her attitude and sat obediently on the chair to gorge himself on the food. At the end of the spring festival, the family happily ate the homemade hot pot. That taste, it was simply unimaginable. After dinner, the family prepared to go out for a walk. Aunt Zhang's house was diagonally opposite the Wuho temple, so when they walked to the street, they saw the street was full of red lanterns, and the street was full of tourists. The family came to the entrance of Jinli to take a look. After seeing that there were many tourists inside, they dismissed the idea. Therefore, Qin Ruing suggested that they go to the movies. And her suggestion was immediately seconded by the little guy. The little guy had never seen a movie before. And it was not only her, even Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before. Of course, it was not that Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before, but she saw an old theater in the past. The screen was much bigger than the current IMAX, and could accommodate thousands of people at a time. Aunt Zhang's impression of the cinema was still in the 1980s, so she did not really want to go. Seeing this, the little guy was immediately unhappy. He stomped his feet and insisted that his grandmother go with him. Aunt Zhang could not persuade him, so she had no choice but to agree. Therefore, Kai Shuqin went home to take care of the child, while Aunt Zhang and Xie Pinglin accompanied Xianxi's family to the movies. When buying tickets, Xianxi actually wanted to buy tickets to the Red Sea operation. However, the little guy was the main character today, so he had no choice but to buy Bonnie Bears. The 4 adults accompanied the child to watch an animated movie. After all, it was an animated movie for young children. Xianxi originally accompanied the little guy into the theater with the mentality of completing a mission. However, after watching it, he felt that the movie was much better than he had imagined. Apart from the joy and humor, it was also filled with a strong sense of fatherly love and warmth. When the little guy saw the part where Baldi Chong missed his father, he actually cried. Perhaps it was because he thought of the time when he did not have his parents by his side. The little guy cried so hard that he could not stop no matter how Qin Ruoying comforted him. In the end, it was Xianxia who comforted him that the little guy finally stopped crying. Now that she was crying, it was worth the price of the ticket. It was already very tiring to be highly focused while watching a movie. Moreover, the little guy had cried for a while just now, so he fell into a deep sleep as soon as he left the cinema. The cinema was not far from home, so they did not take a taxi on the way back. As they walked, Xianxi started chatting with Auntie Zhang. Aunt Zhang, I heard that Rain City is also a tourist attraction? Look, it's rare for Nian to come here. Why don't we go to your hometown and have some fun? Xianxi was still brooding about the energy cultivation pill's failure, so he deliberately led the conversation to that place. However, when Aunt Zhang heard his words, she waved her hand and laughed. Rain City is a city. My hometown is dozens of kilometers away from Rain City. It's in a small town in the county. What's so fun about a remote place like that? The countryside is even better. Look, Nian has been in big cities like Zhonghai and Shangjing since she was young. Let's take her to see the countryside. Maybe it will be good for her future growth. Aunt Zhang had always attached great importance to Nianyan's education, so Xianxia's words immediately touched her heart. Wasn't Mango TV's transfiguration meter very popular? Let the children in the city live in the countryside for a period of time, let them experience the hardships of life and learn to be grateful. Of course, the values of the program itself were distorted and lacked respect for people. The reason why the children fell was not because the family was rich, but because of improper education. Therefore, the education of the children was very important to the parents. Chapter 2:11. It was only around 10 o'clock, but the streets were already quiet. The little girl was sleeping soundly on Xianxia's shoulder. She didn't know that her dearest grandma and dad were now discussing throwing her to the countryside to experience life. The city was developing faster and faster. From the 1990s to the millennium, from pagers to mobile phones, and then to Nokia and Motorola. 10 years after 10 years, Nokia went bankrupt, and Motorola was half dead. From the envied Crown and Santala, to the streets full of Land Rovers and Kian. Wuxia went through waves of rapid development. Even credit cards weren't popularized yet, and it directly entered the mobile payment era. Primary school students used their mobile phones to buy crepes, and aunties used QR codes to collect money. The mainland people couldn't afford tea eggs, and it once became a big joke on the internet. Now no one mentioned it. Yuan would be recovered sooner or later. In another 10 years, who would dare to mention independence in Hong Kong and Tibet? Wuxia's development speed made the Western countries stunned. It also made them realize that the lion from the east had finally woken up. However, although the economic development speed was fast, some things obviously didn't follow the pace of economic development. Instead, they became slightly worse than before. In the past, everyone called farmers uncle. Later on, people began to call the farmers brothers. Later, the word farmer seemed to become a curse word. Now, the so-called city people, who didn't have ancestors who were farmers. To use a word from the Spring Festival Gala to describe it, that was manic. People nowadays were too manic. A program like Transfiguration shouldn't have appeared. For the children in the city, this program undoubtedly gave them a good education opportunity. It let them see the hardships of ordinary people, so that they learned to respect and cherish their current life. However, for the children and parents in the countryside, this program brought them endless harm and doubts about themselves and society. The kind and simple rural children, after seeing the bright lights of the big city, would they ask one question: why? Why did the second generation rich not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives? Why did the second generation poor not be able to walk out of the mountains for the rest of their lives? Education was never a matter of instant results. It was a long and drawn-out battle. From the moment Xianxia returned to Nianyan's side, he was already prepared for this battle. He wanted to teach Nianyan a lesson. What is a human? The nature of heaven and earth was the most precious. This rune was in the shape of an elephant's arm and shin. Mortals all follow the example of humans. Man means an upright animal that knows how to bow in humbly. As the saying goes, it takes 10 years for a tree to grow, but 100 years for a man to grow. There was no perfect person in this world. Xianxia only wanted to do his best to train his daughter into a person that he approved of in his heart. Early the next morning, the whole family set off amidst the little fellow's cheers. In the little guy's understanding, rural areas were no different from tourist attractions. Therefore, when she heard that Xianxia was going to take her to Aunt Zhang's hometown, the little girl was very excited. Xianxia rented a commercial car, and then the family of 7 went straight to Rain City. Aunt Zhang's hometown was in Xianxia County under the jurisdiction of Rain City. They first took the highway to Xianxia County, then took the 108 National Highway to the countryside, and after more than 10 kilometers of winding mountain roads, they finally arrived at the production team in Aunt Zhang's hometown. Of course, the name of the production team had been abolished, and now it was called the Villager Group. The little guy had always been in first-tier cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, and all she saw were reinforced concrete jungles. Suddenly coming to such a picturesque place really gave her a very novel experience. Many people didn't know that there were actually 3 Silk Roads. In addition to the mainland passage from Chang and to Rome opened by Zhang Qian in the Han Dynasty, the other was the Southwest Silk Road. The predecessor of the Southwest Silk Road was the Tea-Horse Ancient Road. It went from Sichuan to Dianzhou, through Myanmar to India, and finally to Iran. The 108 National Highway started from Shangjing and ended at Dianzhou's Spring City. It was 3,356 kilometers long. After this highway entered Sichuan, it basically followed the route of the Tea-Horse Ancient Road. The cars zigzagged along the highway. Because it was a winding mountain road, the speed was very slow. On one side of the road was a cliff, and on the other side was a cliff. Below the cliff was a surging river. When had the little guy ever seen such a spectacular scene? Therefore, she was very excited to lie on the car window, looking at the river under the cliff and constantly exclaiming. Most of the rural areas in the north were concentrated, while the rural areas in the south liked to live separately. Therefore, along the road, from time to time, she would see a few lonely small courtyards standing on the edge of the cliff. When the Beijing-Kunming Expressway was not built, the 108 National Highway was the only way to go from Sichuan to Dianzhou. Therefore, many villagers opened restaurants and small stores along the road to earn some extra money from long-distance outsiders to subsidize their families. However, with the completion of the Beijing-Kunming Expressway, the 108 National Highway went into decline. After all, with the expressway, who would still be circling and bumping on the old road? This also led to the economic development of this route almost stagnating and even regressing. Most of the small houses seen along the road were built more than 10 years ago. In recent years, the real estate speculation was so fierce that the people were also greatly affected. Now, anyone who had a little money would go to the county to buy a house and move the family into the county, instead of choosing to build their own house and continue to stay in this place. This was also the result of the development of the times. Aunt Zhang's hometown was more poor and backward than Xianxia imagined. This place was called Tongjiegu. It was a small village that was 5 kilometers away from the nearest town. There were a few 2-story bungalows scattered on both sides of the road. The first floor of the bungalow was a restaurant, but now the door was closed. Even the signboard with the words, dining and accommodation, had become tattered and uncared for. Other than these few houses, most of the other houses were bungalows. Some were even black wooden houses. At first glance, it was obvious that they were old buildings from the 50s and 60s. There was no school in the village. If the children wanted to go to school, they had to spend a yuan every morning to take a van to the town's middle school. However, who did not have a few rich and powerful relatives now? When the children reached the age of middle school, the villagers would send the children to the county or the relative's house in the town. Therefore, there were basically no children in their teens in this place. Instead, there were many children about the same age as Nian. The children were in groups of 3 to 5. As soon as they saw the GL8 from Chengdu, they swarmed over. After Qin Ruing took the little girl out of the car, several children immediately surrounded her and chattered in a dialect that she did not understand at all. This scene was completely out of the little girl's expectations and immediately made her a little scared. The little girl timidly hid most of her body behind Qin Ruing, only revealing half of her head to look at the peers in front of her. She was afraid of others, but the children in front of her were not afraid of her. Instead, they smiled and made faces at her. Aunt Zhang noticed the little girl's strange behavior and laughed like she was chasing ducks. She waved to the children and said, "Go, go, go, go play somewhere else." These children seemed to know Auntie Zhang, so after chattering for a while, they ran away like a swarm of bees. Once the children had run far away, the little one cowered and crawled out from behind Qin Ruing. She looked at the bungalows around her and then looked at the shabby bungalow not far away. This small village was built on the national highway. On one side was a mountain, and on the other was a river valley. Because there were few cars passing by now, the village was particularly quiet. The little girl looked at this strange place blankly and suddenly felt a sense of oppression in her heart. Chapter 212. The sunshine of the 7th day of the Chinese New Year shone on her head, but the little fellow's heart was cold. Was this the countryside? Why was it different from what she had imagined? National Highway 108 went straight through the village, and all kinds of old buildings were not arranged neatly on both sides of the street. The arrival of Xianxia's family caused a lot of noise here, so that many villagers leaned out to observe them silently. The village was not big, and one could see the end of it at a glance. On the left side of the road was a mountain, and a muddy road went straight up the mountain. On the right side was the valley and large fields. The wheat fields in winter were not as beautiful as in autumn. The withered yellow straw was scattered on the field in a disorderly manner, and it was a scene of withering. The car had been booked by Xianxia, but there were no hotels nearby, so the driver could only drive back to the county to stay. Of course, his expenses for these few days were naturally all on Xianxia's head. The little fellow wanted to leave with the driver, but was stopped by Qin Ru. When she saw the GL8 turn around and drive away, the little fellow suddenly curled her lips. Looking at that pitiful little appearance, it seemed that she was about to cry. Qin Ru quickly hugged her in her arms and comforted her. "Ninian, be good. This is Grandma's home, don't be afraid. We'll stay here with Grandma for a few days and then go back. Don't you want to accompany Grandma?" Hearing this, the little fellow said with grievance, "I want to be with Grandma, but I don't like it here. I don't like it here. Mama, I want to go home." Children were always a little afraid of strangers. And this was a new environment that the little fellow had never been to, so even if Xianxia, Qin Ru, and Grandma were all by her side, the little fellow still felt very uncomfortable and depressed. The little fellow was upset. Her reaction also attracted Xianxia's attention. When Xianxia saw her pitiful appearance, he immediately came to Qin Ru's side. After taking the little fellow from Qin Ru's arms, Xianxia said to her with a smile, "Ninian, are you scared?" However, when the little girl heard Xianxia's question, she immediately turned her little head and muttered unhappily, "Papa, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. It's not fun here." Seeing this, Xianxia immediately smiled and asked, "Why isn't it fun here?" "It's just not fun. I don't like it here." "Ninian, you're wrong. This place is actually very fun. Not fun at all." Before Xianxia could finish his words, the little fellow had already interrupted him. From the looks of it, she seemed to be angry. Xianxia reached out to pinch her little face, but she swatted his hand away. This little thing was still at odds with her father. When it came to coaxing his daughter, Xianxia was now very handy and had many tricks up his sleeve. Therefore, when he saw that the little fellow seemed to be conflicted, he decisively stopped the topic and asked in a negotiating tone, "Ninian, how about this? Let's stay here for one night. If you really don't like it here, Papa will take you home tomorrow, okay?" After hearing Xianxia's words, the little fellow rested her head on his shoulder and thought for a moment. Then she reluctantly hummed and reluctantly agreed, "Then we'll stay for one night. Just one night. Pinky promise." After that, the little fellow stretched out her little finger and motioned for Xianxia to pinky promise with her. "Okay, Papa will pinky promise with you. I promise I'll keep my word." The father and daughter reached an agreement, and the little fellow finally stopped throwing a tantrum. Then, under the guidance of Aunt Zhang's family, they walked down the path to the valley. After walking for about 200 meters, Xianxia's family finally saw Aunt Zhang's old house. Aunt Zhang's old house. It was indeed very old. The living environment in the Kangju district was already very poor, but compared to Aunt Zhang's old house, it was really the difference between a villa hotel and a small train station hotel. This house was built by Aunt Zhang's father's generation. The main materials were wood and yellow mud. Because it was exposed to wind and rain all year round, it caused the wood to mold and turn black. Therefore, when looking from the outside, the whole house was somewhat dark. The house was surrounded by fields, and a few hundred meters down was the river. Not far away, there was a bamboo forest with luxuriant foliage, so much so that it looked quite gloomy in broad daylight. In the morning, Chengdu was still bustling, but after 3 hours, they came to such a quiet and backward little village. Not to mention the little fellow, even Qin Ru was somewhat not used to it. Although the little fellow had already agreed to stay here for one night, when they were close to the house, she was still somewhat unwilling. She kept twisting her body and shouting for Xianxia to put her down. Xianxia did not say much to her. He carried her directly into the house. At this time, it was right to cut the Gordian knot. After letting her get used to it, naturally, she would not be as resistant as she was now. In reality, Xianxia really thought that this place was not bad. The mountains were clear and the water was clear, and the land was full of outstanding people. Although the house was a little simple, it was good in terms of peace and comfort. Moreover, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth here was very rich. After staying in this place for a long time, even breathing could make one feel refreshed and very comfortable. A few days ago, Aunt Zhang suddenly fell ill, so Xie Pinglin hurriedly brought the old lady back to Chengdu. They had only been away for a few days, so there was obviously the smell of smoke in this house. This house was actually very big. Looking at it now, it was 4 bedrooms, 1 living room, and 1 kitchen. Overall, it was very good. The only bad thing was that there was no bathroom, so it was very inconvenient to take a bath. Moreover, the bathroom was a latrine, the kind that was extremely smelly. Aunt Zhang was already prepared for this. The bungalow by the street used to be a hotel. There were toilets and bathrooms on the first floor. Aunt Zhang had already informed the owner of the house, so Xianxia's family could go there if they wanted to wash up. After Xianxia carried the little girl around the house, the little girl gradually relaxed, so she turned her little head and began to look around. There was a TV in the living room at home, but it was a small color TV from the 80s and 90s. There was no wall paint in the old house. After a layer of lime was casually applied, newspapers were pasted on the wall as wallpaper. Most of these newspapers were from 30 to 40 years ago, so many of them were already yellowed and rolled up. There was also a portrait of Grandpa Mao on the wall. It was a common poster of that era, so it looked quite old. Although the house was old, it was very clean. Although furniture like the wardrobe and table were old, because of its age, it had a different kind of charm. Perhaps it was because the house and furniture were made of wood that there was always an indescribable wood fragrance in the house. It was very comfortable to smell. Overall, this house was a little too simple on the outside, but the other places were really not as bad as the little girl had imagined. After roughly understanding the internal structure of the house, the little girl could finally accept the fact that she would be staying here for a night. Therefore, she came to the living room under Aunt Zhang's call, then sat on a small stool and ate oranges. Chapter 213. Auntie Zhang's house did not have a TV on demand, nor did it have so many strange toys, so the little fellow lost interest after sitting for a while. She began to wander around. The little fellow wanted to go out and play, but when she stood at the threshold and looked at the large field outside the house, she curled her lips and stopped. She didn't dare to go. In Trump's words, it was her first time here, and she hadn't even warmed up the territory yet. Of course, she didn't dare to go anywhere. The little fellow put one hand on the door and the other hand flipped the corner of her clothes. That pitiful little look was somewhat like a resentful wife waiting for her husband to return from work. Qin Ruiying was helping Kai Shuqin clean up the kitchen. When she came out and saw the little fellow's back, she immediately went to Xianxia and gently touched him. Xianxia certainly understood what she meant, so after a slight smile, he suddenly stepped forward and hugged the little fellow from behind. The little fellow exclaimed. When she turned around and saw that it was her father, she couldn't help but pout. Before she could speak, Xianxia asked with a smile, "Ninian, Mom and Grandma are tidying up the house. Dad will take you out to play, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow turned her head and glanced at the surrounding environment, then muttered in a low voice, "It's not fun here. Why is it not fun? It's just that you're still young and haven't seen those fun things. Let's go, Dad will take you to see it." After that, she carried the little fellow and walked directly to the bamboo forest. It was noon now, and the sun was very bright, but once they entered the bamboo forest, there was still a chill in the air. This bamboo forest was quite old, and the branches and leaves were very lush, so much so that it blocked a lot of the sun, looking a little gloomy. Cold and wet places had always been unfavored by mammals, so the little fellow's first reaction was to want to leave. She sensed her fear, so he patted her back, and then released a strand of genuine. Under the true essence, the little fellow immediately had a warm and comfortable feeling, which also gradually calmed her slightly trembling little body. The bamboo forest was not very big, and one could see the end of it at a glance. After she brought her into the bamboo forest, he placed the little fellow on the ground. Because very few people would come here, the fallen bamboo leaves had piled up layer after layer. Stepping on them would immediately make a rustling sound. Since the beginning of the new year, the sun had been shining continuously for several days. Therefore, when the little fellow stepped on the ground, the pile of withered leaves began to creak. This made her feel a little interested, so she stepped on it and started jumping around. Seeing that she was no longer afraid, Xianxia led her to a mother bamboo, then squatted down and said to her, "Nian, Daddy will teach you how to dig winter bamboo shoots, okay?" "Winter bamboo shoots? What is it?" "This is it." As Xianxia talked to her, he plucked a tree branch and started digging on the ground. He didn't even have to dig a few times before he dug out a yellowish object from the ground. This thing had a sharp head and a big butt. In terms of shape, it was somewhat similar to baogu. It was wrapped in a thick shell. This was winter bamboo shoots. Winter bamboo shoots were also a characteristic product of the south. They were the most abundant in January and February every year. They had the reputation of golden clothes and white jade, the best among vegetables. Because they had not been unearthed yet, the winter bamboo shoots were tender and white like jade. It was the most common side dish at banquets when cooked with meat. For example, the famous Wuxia bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat. Digging winter bamboo shoots was actually very simple. Tender bamboo would not grow bamboo shoots. The darker the color, the older the age. Generally, one should not choose too tender or too old. After selecting the bamboo, you can observe it from below. Whenever you see a slight bump in the ground or a loose crack, you can use your feet to lightly step on it. If the ground is not firm and has a soft feeling, it is a sign that there are bamboo shoots. She briefly explained to the little fellow, and then handed the tree branch to her. Digging bamboo shoots required a small hoe, but she could not find a hoe for the time being, so he could only secretly use his jinchi to loosen the soil for her when the little fellow was digging. Under the guidance of Xianxia, the little fellow chose a new bamboo and began to dig below. After digging a few times, she felt that the tree branch seemed to have touched something. Her eyes could not help but brighten, and she dug harder. Sure enough, when she dug around the hard thing and dug out the surrounding soil, a winter bamboo shoot buried in the soil finally appeared in front of her eyes. "Papa, I dug it out. I dug it out." After the little fellow pulled the winter bamboo shoot out of the ground, she did not care about the mud on it, grabbed the winter bamboo shoot and waved it excitedly. But at this moment, an accident suddenly occurred. The little fellow held the winter bamboo shoot in front of Xianxia as if she was presenting a treasure. Just as she took the winter bamboo shoot with a smile and was about to put it away to make bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat for the little fellow later, the little fellow's eyes suddenly drifted to the low slope in front of the bamboo forest. Following which, she was so frightened that her hands started to tremble. Suddenly, she started to cry loudly. She hurriedly hugged the little fellow into his arms and comforted her, and then looked back with a livid face. There was a person behind them. She knew about the arrival of this person, but he thought that the other party was a villager here, so he did not pay attention to him. But he did not expect that after seeing this person, the little fellow was so scared that she burst into tears. A mistake. Because there was no divine sense. She could only perceive with his 5 senses. After hearing it, he did not look back. When he turned around, he finally understood why this person was able to scare the little girl to tears. It was a woman. An old woman whose specific age could not be determined. Her face was haggard, and her hair was silver. She looked like an ordinary old lady. But what was truly shocking was her attire. This old woman was wearing a brightly colored old-fashioned wedding robe. It was bright red, as dazzling as a young girl who was about to get married. The withered old woman was wearing a bright red wedding robe, and there was an indescribable strangeness about her. Xianxia's expression turned cold. After picking up the little fellow from the ground, he gently pressed the little fellow's head into his arms. Then, Xianxia's figure suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already standing in front of the old woman. Xianxia did not stand on ceremony. With one hand holding the crying little fellow, he directly slapped the old woman's head with the other. However, after Xianxia's slap, the old woman did not dodge, as if she did not see it. Her gaze was dull, and she was probably either retarded or stupid. Xianxia did not want to hurt her, but wanted to see her condition. As expected, she was just an ordinary old woman. The only difference was that she had lost her young soul. The little fellow's cries were very loud, and the moment she started crying, it had already alarmed Aunt Zhang in the room. Aunt Zhang quickly ran out of the room. When she came to the courtyard and looked at the bamboo forest, Xianxia had already returned to his original spot with the little fellow and looked at the old woman from afar. Chapter 214. Under Auntie Zhang's loud call, Xianxia immediately carried the crying little girl back to Auntie Zhang's courtyard. Auntie Zhang first glared at Xianxia rather angrily, then angrily took the little girl from Xianxia's arms. "Look at you, why did you bring her around for no reason? Even the sun can't shine in that old forest. I grew up here and felt that that place was a bit gloomy, so I wouldn't go near there for no reason. It's not like you don't know that children are timid. Are you really not afraid of scaring her?" Auntie Zhang grumbled while carefully comforting the little girl. This time, the little girl was really frightened by the old woman in the wedding robe. Lying in Auntie Zhang's arms, she cried bitterly and couldn't stop no matter how she comforted her. When Qin Ring and Kai Shuqin heard the commotion, they also hurriedly came out of the house. Looking at their somewhat resentful gazes, Xianxia could only helplessly shake his head. It was indeed his mistake. If he had turned back to look at the old woman earlier, he wouldn't have let the old woman appear in the little girl's line of sight at all. The little girl was frightened and couldn't stop crying for a long time. Seeing this, Xianxia asked Auntie Zhang to hand the little girl to him, then carried the little girl back and forth in the courtyard. "Ninian, it's okay, that strange person has already run away. Daddy is still here, don't be afraid." It seemed that his comforting words worked. After about 2 minutes, the little girl who was still wailing just now actually fell asleep on his shoulder just like that. This made Auntie Zhang finally breathe a sigh of relief. She hurriedly shouted at Xianxia to put the little girl on the bed, ready to let her have a good sleep first. In fact, the little girl didn't fall asleep on her own. In order to prevent this from leaving a psychological scar on her, Xianxia had no choice but to cast a mind-loss spell on the little girl. This spell could make the little girl temporarily unconscious. When she woke up, she would forget what had just happened. Xianxia carried the little girl back to the bed, covered her with a blanket, then turned and left the room. In the living room, Aunt Zhang was still brooding over the fact that Xianxia ran around with the child, but when Xianxia told her about the old woman in the wedding gown, Aunt Zhang immediately frowned and muttered thoughtfully, "Old woman in the wedding gown? Could it be that you have met Guifan?" "Guifan?" Sigh, no wonder Nian was so scared. Looking at Xianxia's puzzled expression, Auntie Zhang smiled helplessly and then explained, "Guifan is about the same age as me. When I married and moved to Rong City, she had just gotten married. I haven't seen her for almost 30 years. When I came back for the New Year this year, I heard that Guifan had gone crazy. She's been wearing her wedding dress all day long and wandering around the village like a ghost." "It's so scary." "Crazy? But I heard them say that last year, her son suddenly fell into the river and drowned. Guifan couldn't figure it out and drove herself crazy." "Last year?" "Yes, I heard it was last summer." After hearing Aunt Zhang's words, Xianxia frowned and didn't say anything for a long time. The old woman in the wedding gown's real name was Zhao Guifan. Xianxia had close contact with her before, so he knew that she wasn't simply crazy. She clearly looked like she had lost her yang soul. The yang soul was different from the yin soul. Losing the yin soul would only cause the body to be weak and sickly, but if the yang soul was lost, it would cause the yin energy to control the yang. It would cause the human heart to be dark and weak, and the 4 major diseases would come to an end. The dark heart mentioned above referred to people becoming stupid and foolish, just like what Zhao Guifan had just shown. Losing the yang soul meant that one wouldn't live long. Zhao Guifan was only a few years younger than Aunt Zhang. If she was born without a soul, and it was the extremely important yang soul, then she obviously wouldn't have been able to live to such an old age. Without a doubt, Zhao Guifan's sudden madness was definitely not because of her son's death, but because she had lost her yang soul. A perfectly fine person wouldn't lose her yang soul for no reason. Then he thought of Aunt Zhang's sudden and inexplicable faint a few days ago. Tianxi's expression immediately darkened. This place was really a little strange. The absent-minded curse wasn't as gentle as the meditation curse. This also caused the little fellow to sleep for a long time. When she woke up, she would have to go tomorrow. The countryside wasn't like the city. There were no street lights or billboards here. As soon as the sun set, the entire village would be completely swallowed by the curtain of night. Why did the supernatural phenomenon in the countryside continue? Wasn't it because there were too few entertainment activities in the past? At night, everyone would either wash up and go to sleep, or close the door to make little people to play. It was indeed much better than before. Every household had a TV, and everyone had a 4G phone, so after dark, everyone could watch TV and play with their phones before going to sleep. Perhaps it was because they had returned to the countryside. Aunt Zhang's family rested very early. However, at 9:30 p.m., they all washed up and went to sleep. After the lights in the room were turned off, the outside of the house was suddenly pitch black, and one couldn't even see their fingers. It wasn't spring yet, when everything was recovering. Without the chirping of birds and insects, it was particularly quiet outside the house. Lying on the bed, if one closed their eyes and listened carefully, they could even vaguely hear the sound of flowing water below the valley. Qin Ring sat cross-legged on the bed and silently cultivated, while Xianxia kept looking in the direction of the window. Suddenly, Xianxia sat up from the bed. His movement also alarmed Qin Ru. Qin Ruing was about to speak, but Xianxia had already gently touched the back of her hand, and then whispered, "This place is strange. It shouldn't be a coincidence that Aunt Zhang fell ill before. I'll go out and have a look. I'll be back in a while." Then, Xianxia got up and quietly left the room. After setting up a restriction to surround the house, Xianxia flew directly into the sky and carefully looked at the village in front of him from a high place. The spiritual aura was still recovering, and the spiritual aura of heaven and earth here had become very rich. But other than that, there didn't seem to be anything strange. Xianxia carefully observed every building in the village, trying to find out what was wrong with it. But at this moment, Xianxia suddenly found that there seemed to be a figure moving on the path up the mountain. There were only two main roads in the village, one going up the mountain and the other going down the river. The moonlight tonight was very weak. Although it wasn't 10 o'clock in the evening, the road was already dark and he couldn't see anything at all. The person walked on the path without a flashlight or a lantern. He just moved forward in the dark, as if he wasn't afraid that he would fall down. If it weren't for Xianxia's eyesight that was far better than ordinary people's, he probably wouldn't have been able to find this sneaky person. So, he held his breath and flew above the person's head, wanting to see what this person wanted to do sneaking up the mountain in the middle of the night instead of sleeping. However, when Xianxia got closer, he suddenly found that. Chapter 215. People who had never been to the countryside might not be able to understand that feeling. That kind of darkness was just like what Qian Zhongshu described in the siege. The night was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. In this kind of night, even ghosts would have to touch their noses and turn around. A cat would hate itself for not being able to use its mustache as an insect's feeler. In the late winter night, the mountain wind whistled. The withered grass and bare branches made a strange creaking sound. The surroundings were pitch black and it was almost impossible to see anything clearly. The tree branches were constantly swaying in the mountain wind. Under the faint moonlight, the shadows of the trees on the mountain walls were like ghosts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, wailing and howling as they demanded the lives of passers-by. Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, was wearing a wedding robe and wandering on the mountain road in the middle of the night. If someone were to pass by and shine a flashlight on her body, not to mention the little guy, Even a strong-willed adult would be scared to the point of insanity by Zhao Guifan. She carefully observed the surroundings, but there were no traces of spiritual energy fluctuations in the surroundings. This meant that Zhao Guifan wasn't being cast by someone, but she wandered here in the middle of the night for no reason. A crazy person's brain circuit really couldn't be understood with common sense. She was very interested in Zhao Guifan's situation, so he quietly floated in the air. He wanted to see where Zhao Guifan was not sleeping in the middle of the night and where she was going. There was an abandoned coal mine on the mountain next to Tongjiegu. The winding mud road up the mountain was built by the coal mine owner a few years ago for mining. It was big enough for a large truck to drive normally. The coal mine had been abandoned for many years, and the mud road had been eroded out of shape by the wind and rain. It was very difficult to walk on. Fortunately, it hadn't rained these few days. Otherwise, not to mention Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, even normal villagers would have fallen countless times on the mountain. Zhao Guifan's steps were very slow, so she also walked very steadily. Like a snail, she slowly moved up the mountain along the mud road. Fortunately, the person watching her was Xianxia. If it was someone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to stand the boring wait and would have directly returned to the house to sleep. Zhao Guifan left at 10 in the evening and walked for nearly 4 hours. At around 2 in the morning, she finally arrived at the abandoned coal mine on the mountain. This was a small coal mine. It was different from the underground coal mine shown in the blind shaft. There was no elevator here. Instead, a hole was drilled into the mountain wall. Then one would follow the hole and push forward. This was the so-called adit mine. Compared to the development of inclined wells and vertical wells, adit development was the simplest in terms of technology, the cheapest in terms of economy, and also the safest development method. However, this mining method was only suitable for mountainous areas, so it was usually only found in small coal mines in the southwest. The passageway of the mine was a circular arch. It was dark inside the cave, and the weak moonlight couldn't shine in at all. No one knew what Zhao Guifan was thinking. After arriving at the mine, she actually swaggered directly into the mine. It was true that the reckless were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of the reckless. Wasn't this crazy woman the one who didn't care about her life? Not to mention that it was still early in the morning, even if it was noon, when the sun was at its brightest, not many people would dare to enter this abandoned mine. Zhao Guifan had already gone crazy. A lunatic who didn't sleep in the middle of the night and went up the mountain in the dark into this abandoned mine. Thinking about it, it was also a very strange thing. She made up his mind today to get to the bottom of this matter, so after seeing Zhao Guifan enter the cave, he also flew into the dark cave entrance. As soon as they entered the cave, the surrounding temperature suddenly dropped several degrees. There was no light in the cave at all. As soon as Zhao Guifan entered the cave, her figure completely disappeared in the darkness. She snapped his fingers, and a fluorescent green light ball flew out from his fingertips. The light ball flew to Zhao Guifan's head, illuminating the road ahead for her. In this regard, Zhao Guifan didn't have any reaction. She just continued to walk forward. There were sidewalks on both sides of the adit mine, and in the middle was the mine cart track. Zhao Guifan walked all the way along the track. After walking for about 10 minutes, a fork suddenly appeared in front of her. One to the left, the other to the right. However, Zhao Guifan didn't stop at all. She turned and walked directly into the fork on the right. Therefore, it could be seen that this crazy woman obviously came here often before, so she was very familiar with this place. After walking for about 40 minutes, Zhao Guifan finally came to the end. She stood at the end of the passage for a while, and then a smile suddenly appeared on her withered old face. As if she saw something, Zhao Guifan quickly went up to greet her. "Son, mother is here to see you," Zhao Guifan said, while squatting in front of the plant at the end of the mine. This was a very strange scene. The mine was an extremely damp and gloomy place that didn't see the sun all day long, but a plant actually appeared. The plant's stem was upright, and the plant was tall, about 1 meter tall. Its appearance was very similar to a reed, but the color was completely different. Reeds were also called reeds. The so-called reeds were green, and the white dew was frost. Reeds were green in spring, but in autumn, they would wither and turn yellow. It was the end of winter and the beginning of spring, and most of the plants outside were still in a withered state. But this reed-like plant that grew in the deepest part of the mine was bright red. It was bright red, and in terms of the degree of beauty, it was even more beautiful than the sea of poppy flowers. This was a very strange scene. A crazy woman in a wedding robe at this moment was like a kind mother, squatting on the ground and rubbing her cheek against the red reed. The reed leaves gently brushed against her face, but she was like her son's hand caressing her cheek, very warm and comfortable. She silently stood behind Zhao Guifan. When he saw this plant for the first time, he already understood why Zhao Guifan had gone crazy. Her madness was because of this plant in front of him. Although this plant looked very similar to a reed, it was not a reed at all, but a harmful plant called blood thorn by immortal cultivators. Blood thorn was not a very common plant in the heavenly jade world. The reason it was called blood thorn was because this plant was bright red, and it could emit a special fragrance to attract prey to come close. Once the prey came close, their soul would be taken, and they would willingly let it suck their blood. It was strange enough that a plant that only existed in the heavenly jade world appeared on Earth, but what made Xianxia feel even more strange was blood thorn was a clump of plants, and as long as it grew, it would definitely grow in patches, like reeds forming a reed marsh. But there was only one blood thorn in front of him, and it grew in such a remote and gloomy abandoned mine. Chapter 216. At the end of the dark and damp abandoned passageway, Zhao Guifan squatted beside the blood thorn, constantly rubbing the blood thorn's leaves with her cheeks. The tender and beautiful leaves suddenly formed a sharp contrast with Zhao Guifan's wrinkled, haggard and pale cheeks. If one looked carefully, they would find that the blood thorn's leaves were like countless tiny tentacles, tightly attached to Zhao Guifan's cheeks. It was absorbing Zhao Guifan's blood essence through the leaves, but Zhao Guifan seemed to feel very comfortable. Looking at her affectionate attitude towards the blood thorn, she would probably stay here for a while every night. It was no wonder that a crazy woman like Zhao Guifan could go up the mountain in the middle of the night without any obstructions. It turned out that she had come here too many times and was already familiar with the way. Zhao Guifan was a few years younger than Aunt Zhang, but now she looked like an 80 or 90-year-old woman, haggard and withered, like she was about to die. Fortunately, there was only one blood thorn here, and not a clump. Otherwise, Zhao Guifan's soul would have been scattered, and she would have turned into a dried corpse lying in this secluded mine, growing mold and maggots. Although the blood thorn was a harmful plant, it was different from the plants on Earth. This was a magical plant that could affect the mind of its prey, and rely on devouring the prey's soul and blood essence to nourish itself. However, the blood thorn's roots and leaves were not poisonous, and had great medicinal value, so it was often used as the main ingredient in medicine by immortal cultivators. Zhao Guifan had been eroded by the blood thorn for a long time, and she was already half a step into the gates of hell. In her current situation, even Xianxia couldn't do anything to save her. Death was only a matter of time. In fact, this crazy woman was quite pitiful. He didn't know what kind of sins she committed in her previous life. Not only did she lose her son at such an old age, but she herself was also turned into something neither human nor ghost by this blood thorn. Her fate was really full of misfortune. Thinking of this, she could not help but sigh deeply, and then gently waved his arm. A wave of vital energy suddenly wrapped around Zhao Guifan, pulling her back from the blood thorn. However, just as Zhao Guifan was being pulled away by Xianxia, the blood thorn suddenly began to dance without any wind. Its leaves kept shaking like a person who was dancing, making a series of rustling sounds. Immediately after, an invisible spiritual attack suddenly erupted from Xueji's body. Animals and insects had intelligence, so why couldn't plants? Furthermore, this was no ordinary plant. Therefore, when it was interrupted by Xianxia, this blood thorn immediately became very manic. As its branches and leaves swayed, it directly attacked Xianxia. In the heavenly jade domain, a large-scale blood thorn sea would be classified as a forbidden area by cultivators, and no one would trespass. This was because in addition to causing hallucinations to trap prey, this plant could also directly launch a mental attack. An ant could not bite an elephant to death, but what if the ants became a disaster? The overwhelming number of ants swarmed forward. Not to mention the elephant, even the blue whale would be eaten up in an instant. Although there was only one blood thorn here, it was still very aggressive. After discovering Xianxia, it directly launched an invisible spiritual attack at Xianxia. But it was a pity it did not know who it had provoked today. Without seeing Xianxia do anything, he just stared and the soil under the blood thorn directly loosened and exploded. Then, Xianxia gently waved at the blood thorn. This blood thorn was immediately uprooted by an invisible vital energy and flew directly into his hand. When the blood thorn was planted on the ground, it was about a meter tall. After being uprooted, the roots below were at least 30 centimeters long. Its roots were similar to the roots of a reed, and there were many adventitious roots on it. When the blood thorn was uprooted by Xianxia, the adventitious roots on its roots suddenly twisted crazily like earthworms, which looked very disgusting. The blood thorn lived by devouring souls and blood essence. After being used as medicine, it would naturally be very beneficial to the soul and blood essence of immortal cultivators. Wasn't this the main ingredient that Xianxia lacked now? The blood thorn kept twisting in Xianxia's hand, and at the same time, it kept trying to send out spiritual attacks to disturb Xianxia's thoughts. Xianxia found it long-winded, so he directly grabbed its stem with both hands. Following a soft ka, the sound, Yizichen's eyes lit up. This blood thorn was directly broken into two by him. The world was finally quiet. Because Zhao Guifan was directly pulled back by Xianxia, she was now unconscious. After Xianxia cast a meditation spell on her, he used vital energy to support her and then walked back along the original path. When Xianxia came to the fork again, he suddenly stopped. The mine was very quiet. There were usually bats in the cave, but it was winter now. Although bats were warm-blooded animals, they also needed to hibernate. So this abandoned mine was very quiet, and only the faint sound of water dripping could be heard. Xianxia stood at the fork and paused for a moment. When he stepped out again, he did not walk towards the cave entrance, but went to the left tunnel that he did not go to just now. This abandoned mine was a little interesting. It actually grew a blood thorn that only existed in the heavenly jade domain. Since he was already here, he naturally had to explore the inside and outside of the mine tonight to see if there was anything rare in here. Xianxia walked along the left tunnel. Zhao Guifan was being guided by his vital energy, lying flat and floating behind him. Plus, there was the fluorescent green light above Xianxia's head. If this scene was seen by others, it would not be as simple as causing them to lose their minds. They would directly be scared to death. The mine tunnel on the left was obviously the main tunnel. After Xianxia walked for a while, the mine tunnel suddenly changed from one track to two, and the width on both sides obviously increased by a lot. This should be the main mining area. Along the way, there were many forks in the road, but Xianxia didn't hesitate at all. She didn't even look at those forks, and just went straight down the main road. He had already discovered the abnormality here. In the depths of this abandoned mine, there was a paradise with abundant spirit energy. The spirit energy here was even richer than in the Qinling Mountains. It was probably because this place happened to be in the position of the dragon vein of this mountain, so after the spirit energy recovered, this place directly became a paradise. Xianxia walked along the main tunnel for about 10 minutes before he finally stopped. Because a huge cave suddenly appeared in front of him. This cave was like a flask. The passage Xianxia was in was the narrow mouth of the flask, and the inside of the cave was the belly of the flask. Xianxia walked into the cave, and the surrounding terrain suddenly opened up. This cave was about 4 or 5 meters high, and the actual area was about the size of a basketball court. It was not too big, but it looked very strange. Obviously, the miners would not be so bored as to dig such a strange cave in the coal mine. Chapter 217. Xianxia quietly stood at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the top of the cave. He seemed to have seen something, but because the surrounding light was too dim, he gently snapped his fingers. Under the surge of true essence, the ball of fluorescent green light suspended in midair suddenly flew to the center of the cave, and then became brighter and brighter. Then the ball of light directly turned from green to white, and constantly bloomed with dazzling light. The ball of light emitted a strong light like the summer sun, and instantly lit up every corner of the cave. In an instant, the light was as bright as day, and the fine details could be seen clearly. With the light source, Xianxia directly walked into the cave with Zhao Guifan. At this time, he raised his head again and looked at the top of the cave. There were actually 3 people hanging above the cave. He saw that in the center of the cave, about 3 meters above the ground, a wooden beam was placed on the wall at both ends of the cave. And on this beam, there were 3 people in red wedding robes hanging in order. The 3 of them had their heads down, and their faces were facing down. Their hair was messy, and their long hair hung down naturally, covering their faces. Therefore, it was impossible to tell whether they were male or female, and even whether they were dead or alive. They were hung on the beam with their heads down, and their appearance was somewhat similar to the cured meat that was hung outside the balcony in winter, one after another, and arranged very neatly. What was even more strange was that these people's feet were tied with thick ropes, and there was a medium-sized weight hanging on their feet. The weight was tied with a thin rope, and it hung on their feet, naturally hanging to the ground. And below the weight, there was a wooden basin filled with clear water. In addition, around the wooden basin, there were 3 small incense burners, and they were in a tripartite formation, surrounding the basin in the middle. Each of the small incense burners had a red incense candle inserted into it. The incense candles were already lit, and a light breeze blew, and the candle flame was constantly dancing with the breeze. In the deepest part of the abandoned coal mine, such a strange scene actually appeared, and it was really a bit shocking. Xianxia silently sized up the layout of the cave, then put Zhao Guifan down on the sidewalk outside the cave, and slowly walked into the depths of the cave. The beam was made of wood, the weight was made of gold, the clear water was made of water, the candle was made of fire, and the surrounding area was made of earth. Since it was an arrangement of the 5 elements, he could calculate the time. This year was the year of Wuxia, the 2nd month of the lunar year was the 1st month of the lunar year, and the 8th day of the lunar year was the 1st day of the lunar year. Wuxia is yang, Jane is yang, Bingshu is yang. Yang year, yang month, yang day. Once the sun rose, it would be 1/4 noon, which was also the legendary time of the sun. It was clearly a sunny day, but Xianxia found such a sinister and evil arrangement in this gloomy and abandoned mine. Now that was interesting. Xianxia swaggered into the depths of the cave. At this moment, the person who had been sitting cross-legged on the ground slowly opened his eyes when he heard his footsteps. Yes, there was a person in the cave. That person was sitting cross-legged on the futon below the 3 people in red. He was about 40 years old, wearing a black robe with a cold face and a bun on the top of his head. This dressing was somewhat like a priest in a Taoist temple. He didn't open his eyes when Xianxia lit up the cave. Until Xianxia walked directly into the cave without even saying hello, the person finally couldn't help but open his eyes. After opening his eyes, he first looked up at the light ball suspended above the cave, then looked at Xianxia and asked, "Mister, why are you here so late at night?" Hearing this, Xianxia asked with interest, "Are you an alchemist?" "No, I'm a warlock." "Warlock?" Seeing Xianxia's puzzled look, the person couldn't help but look at him a few more times, then asked curiously, "You don't know about warlocks?" "I really don't know. I wonder if Mister can explain it to me." Alchemist, warlock, and sorcerer. Since Qin Shi Huang killed the alchemists, the theory of yin and yang disasters arose in Western Han. Because of the different ideas, the sorcerer was divided into 2 factions, alchemist and warlock. I'm the successor of the warlock. Alchemist? Warlock? Xianxia pondered for a moment, then asked again, "What's the difference between the 2? However, when the person heard Xianxia's question, it was as if he had heard a joke. He couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. In terms of origin, there's no difference between the 2. The reason why there are 2 different factions, alchemist and warlock, is just because those hypocrites insist on the distinction between good and evil. What is good? What is evil? Alchemists are good, warlocks are evil. This is the difference between alchemists and warlocks. Hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but glance at the layout of the cave. His heart suddenly had the most intuitive understanding of the warlock. Even cultivation had to use such evil methods. No wonder the world said that warlocks were evil. This really wasn't slandering them. Thank you, mister, for your explanation, but I still have a question to ask. Please ask. It was just the first time they met, but the two of them were like old friends, asking and answering questions. It was really a bit magical. I want to ask, why did Mr. arrange this? Xianxia said while pointing at the 3 red-clothed people hanging on the beam. Hearing this, that person glanced at the blood-thorn grass in Xianxia's hand with deep meaning. Then he suddenly laughed out loud. He seemed to be very proud of his masterpiece. After raising his head to look at the 3 red-clothed people above him, that person proudly introduced to Xianxia, "This is a cultivation method that I have spent several decades of effort to create. I have combined many inheritances in the world and went through untold hardships to create. I have named it 5 Elements Soul Refining Technique. The red-clothed soul locks. The weight drops the soul 1 foot above the ground. The soul can't escape with the earth, so the soul stays. The soul guide needle opens the Niwen palace, leads the soul out of the body, hangs on the beam, and hooks the soul with wood. The water and fire array is placed below the feet. The water melts the soul, the fire tempers the soul so it can remove the impurities of the soul. 1 out of 10, only 1 part of the essence will be drawn into the body. After the essence enters the body, you must immediately enter a meditative state, using the essence as a guide to circulate 36 small cycles. When the essence is exhausted, you will circulate 18 large cycles. The external essence will guide your own essence. After completing the cycle, you will not leave each other, touching the heavenly acupoints to open the jade door. If the jade door is opened, it means that you have successfully condensed your essence and you have stepped onto the path of immortality. After the man explained the layout of the cave, he looked at Xianxia with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "I've been thinking about this set of techniques for many years, but I haven't been able to perfect it. Until last year, when I accidentally found this mysterious plant, I finally understood the crux of it and perfected this 5 elements soul refining technique." As he spoke, he pointed at the blood thorn in Xianxia's hand. The expression on his face became playful. However, Xianxia didn't have the self-awareness of a thief. He picked up the blood thorn and casually glanced at it, then nodded and smiled. "Although this blood thorn can steal souls, it is only a plant. I didn't expect you to be able to comprehend the truth of cultivation from it. It is truly admirable. Zhang Sanfeng is probably not much better than this." Xianxia wasn't lying. This person was born on a planet like Earth, but he was able to rely on his own exploration to find the threshold of cultivation. If this kind of talent was placed in the heavenly jade world, there was no way to imagine what he would achieve now. Then I would like to ask, in the past 100 years, has anyone ascended to immortality? Successfully flew into the gate of heaven? I'm afraid they haven't even seen the shadow of the heavenly gate. They worship ancient books all day long as if they're their ancestors. Can they become immortals just like that? Hearing this, Xianxia looked at Sun Wen thoughtfully and didn't say anything. When Sun Wen saw his expression, he immediately smiled proudly and said, "In fact, as far as this old man knows, this celestial being is not the end, but the starting point." As soon as these words were spoken, they resounded throughout the cave like the sound of metal being thrown to the ground. The celestial being was not the end, but the starting point. In a sense, this statement was not wrong. The celestial being was almost above the foundation establishment stage and below the Jindan stage. They who had yet to condense a golden core could only be regarded as low-level cultivators. They had not touched the threshold of the immortal Tao at all. At this point, Sun Wen suddenly let out a burst of strange laughter as if he was mocking something. He said with a look of disdain, "Those people keep talking about Elysium all day long and count on Elysium for everything. They're completely putting the cart before the horse. The path of flowers has never been swept by a destined guest, but the gate of heaven has been opened for you from now on. It's not that one can only ascend to immortality after opening the gate of heaven, but that the gate of heaven will only be opened for you when one's cultivation has succeeded. Very insightful. Xianxia nodded sincerely, expressing his agreement with Sun Wen's words. Sun Wen's point of view was completely different from the village's point of view. Clearly, there was still a lot of debate about the legend of the gate of heaven in this world. Xianxia didn't say anything. After Sun Wen finished his last sentence, he suddenly closed his mouth and looked at him with a faint smile. The cave was strangely quiet. A gust of cold wind came from nowhere. When the wind blew, the 3 red-clothed people hanging on the beams suddenly started to sway. It looked like 3 red-clothed female ghosts were dancing in the cave. Xianxia held the blood-thorn grass and stood casually not far from the cave entrance. Sun Wen looked at the bold young man in front of him with a half-smile. After a moment of silence, Xianxia finally broke the silence. I have another question to ask. Please speak. Sir, why are you telling me these things? Hearing this, Sun Wen suddenly laughed and said, This old man has been in seclusion for a long time, and it's been many years since I've chatted with someone like today. Speaking of this, Sun Wen's expression changed, and a fierce light appeared in his eyes. He said coldly, You and I can be considered to be fated, but unfortunately, in addition to trespassing on my cave residence today, you also destroyed the immortal grass that I have painstakingly cultivated for many years. I'm afraid you can only pay for this with your life. Why would he say so much to a young man he didn't know? Wasn't it because he had created a peerless cultivation method, but there was no way to publicize it? Only the dead could keep a secret. Therefore, from the moment Xianxia stepped into the cave, Sun Wen had no intention of letting him leave alive. Seeing this, Xianxia couldn't help but sigh deeply and said, Sir, you have great talent, but it's a pity that you've gone astray. What a pity! With that, he held the blood-thorn grass with his right hand and raised his left hand, making an inviting gesture to Sun Wen. Seeing this, Sun Wen's face turned cold, and he couldn't figure out this young man's background. This was obviously his immortal's cave, yet this young man had such a confident appearance. Could it be that he had some backing? Thinking of this, Sun Wen frowned and asked, Who exactly are you? Xianxia smiled, and suddenly an idea popped up in his mind, so he said to Sun Wen, Wu Lian, Special Affairs Department. Special Affairs Department, Special Affairs Department Office. Compared to the Emergency Department, the Special Affairs Department was the real main department of the Wu Lian. Obviously, Sun Wen wasn't really cut off from the world, so when he heard Xianxia say the word Special Affairs Department, his face instantly darkened, and he immediately rushed towards Xianxia. In the eyes of Wuxia's cultivators, the word Wu Lian was a very unlucky existence. This organization was part of the country's power, and once Sun Wen's secret was discovered by the Wu Lian, it would be no different from being stuck with dog skin plaster. Unless he left Wuxia, what awaited him would be the Wu Lian's endless pursuit. After dealing with this young man, he would have to find another place to cultivate in seclusion. Sun Wen was slightly different from great-granduncle. Great-granduncle was a martial artist, from the outside to the inside. Sun Wen was a sorcerer, from the inside to the outside. Therefore, their fighting styles were very different. When Sun Wen rushed towards Xianxia, he suddenly waved his right hand, his 5 fingers forming a claw, and fiercely clawed at Xianxia. A black shadow suddenly flew out from his hand. Then, the black shadow seemed to have turned into a malicious spirit, its face contorted as it screamed. The ghost didn't make any sound, but at this moment, a sharp, ear-piercing howl suddenly rang in Xianxia's mind. The sound was like the sound of 2 pieces of foam rubbing against each other. It was exceptionally harsh and unpleasant to the ear, and could instantly cause goosebumps to rise on anyone who heard it. Using a killing move right from the start, Sun Wen really wasn't prepared to let this young man leave alive today. Yellow Sky Path of Spirits. Samsara Impermanence. The first of every month, the routine of asking for monthly votes. Chapter 219. Sun Wen's claw was very similar to the 9-in white bone claw. As he waved his claw, a ghost shadow suddenly appeared in the air and went straight for Xianxia. Looking at the way the ghost was moving, It was obvious that this move must be a combination of internal and external attacks. Not only could it hurt the enemy's body physically, but it could also affect the enemy's soul spiritually. It was extremely evil. The malicious ghosts kept howling, and invisible sound waves came one after another. Xianxia was not affected at all. He stood in place with a smile, and his heart was constantly trying to figure out Sun Wen's cultivation method. When the black shadow was about to pounce on him, Xianxia finally made a move. He raised his left hand and pointed a finger at it. That black shadow was like a shadow that had seen the sun. It screamed miserably and disappeared in midair. Sun Wen could not help but raise his eyebrows when he saw this. He knew that he had encountered a tough opponent today. After Sun Wen called himself a virtuous teacher, he was actually the successor of Zhang Jiao. As a top-notch necromancer after Su Fu, Zhang Jiao had attained a peerless cultivation base with the art of peace and peace that he had obtained from an unknown source. Because of that, he was honored as a great teacher. The impermanence of samsara came from the Taiping essential technique, and it was an upgraded version that Sun Wen improved with the 5 elements soul refining technique. He did not expect that Xianxia could easily break it with one finger. How could Sun Wen not be surprised? How was this a young man? He was clearly an old monster who had a technique to retain his youthful appearance. In fact, Sun Wen was not a middle-aged man. He was born during the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty and was already more than 180 years old. Sun Wen's talent was indeed far superior to ordinary people. As the only remaining successor of the Taiping path, he had already stepped into the soul conduit realm in his 40s under the guidance of his master. He was known as the Taiping Heavenly Master. After becoming a Heavenly Master, Sun Wen was not willing to be mediocre. Instead, he began to travel around to find a way to go further. Sun Wen was different from great-granduncle. He did not believe that the Heavenly Gate could allow people to ascend. Therefore, he had never counted on the Heavenly Gate. Instead, he had been quietly cultivating. He practiced diligently all day long, which made his cultivation far superior to great-granduncle. In fact, Sun Wen was only one step away from being able to form the 3 flowers and truly step into the golden core realm. With the revival of the spirit qi of heaven and earth, Sun Wen had also found a way to cultivate qi. Perhaps if he was given enough time, Sun Wen would be able to carve out a path of his own. Regardless of whether it was good or evil, as long as he could continue down this path, then it was the right path. Unfortunately, Sun Wen met Xianxia today. He was like a walking steel plate in this world. Therefore, when Sun Wen saw that his move was easily broken by Xianxia, he immediately stopped and asked with a frown, "Who are you?" "I've already told you. It's the Wu Yan Special Affairs Department." Sun Wen was clearly dissatisfied with this answer. Therefore, he coldly shouted in anger, pretending to be mysterious, "Since that's the case, I'll capture you first and then slowly interrogate you." After he finished speaking, Sun Wen's black robes began to flutter even though there was no wind. A strong storm suddenly blew in the cave. 2 long dragons of murderous aura rolled out from Sun Wen's sleeves like tornadoes in the desert, roaring as they rushed towards Xianxia. These 2 tornadoes were actually formed by Sun Wen's magical power. In the process of rushing towards Xianxia, the 2 tornadoes even intertwined with each other, turning into a sharp, cone-shaped cyclone. The cyclone spun rapidly like a sharp knife. Like a high-speed drill, when the cyclone rushed towards Xianxia, it also tore a vacuum in the air. This move was monstrous, but when Xianxia saw it, he shook his head in disappointment. Compared to the improved version of the Samsara Impermanence, this move did not have any special features. It looked powerful, but in fact, it was the simplest way to use Vital Essence. It was just using brute force to break through all techniques. This was also a method that Xianxia often used. Perhaps he wanted to force Sun Wen to take out his trump card. So when the cyclone rushed towards him, Xianxia raised his left hand. Like fishing in the water, he directly reached into the center of the cyclone, and then he squeezed hard. This fierce cyclone was like a poisonous snake that was pinched by him. After struggling helplessly for a while, it turned into countless bursts of energy and dissipated. The qi that scattered in all directions hit the rock walls of the cave, and like a machine gun, Countless stones fell from the rock walls with a crackling sound. The rubble fell to the ground, and a rustling sound was heard. Under Sun Wen's incredulous gaze, Xianxia calmly raised an index finger, then smiled slightly. "You still have one last chance to make a move, don't let me down." Hearing this, Sun Wen could not help but widen his eyes, the hair on his body stood up, and the expression on his face was like he had seen a ghost. It was no wonder he was afraid. The move just now was Sun Wen's own killing move. In terms of lethality, it was a bit stronger than the Samsara impermanence. It was not that he was boasting, but as long as this move was used, even a great master in the gang state would be instantly turned into minced meat. But after Xianxia put her hand in, she acted as if nothing had happened. Sun Wen couldn't help but have some thoughts of retreating. Who was this young man? Did he come here specifically for him? Because he could not figure out Xianxia's background, the expression on Sun Wen's face became more and more dignified. When he saw that Xianxia was still as calm as before, Sun Wen had to seriously consider Xianxia's words. Last chance to make a move? Thinking of this, Sun Wen could not help but look at Xianxia, as if he wanted to say something. But after hesitating for a moment, he just sighed deeply, and the expression on his face became quite complicated. Today was the Yang year, the Yang month, and the Yang day. It was the rare time of the highest Yang. The depths of the abandoned mine had become quite due to the lack of sunlight all day long. In addition to Sun Wen's arrangement, this place was now a place of extreme yin and extreme evil. Extreme Yang time, extreme yin place. Extreme yin and extreme yang. He wanted to use this arrangement to help him break through to the celestial being realm, but he did not expect this arrangement to become his killing move in the end. Thinking of this, Sun Wen could not help but clench his teeth. He suddenly put his hands together in front of his chest and directly made various seals. As he kept making seals, a yin and yang formation slowly condensed and formed in front of his chest. Seeing this, Xianxia was not anxious at all. He was now like a cat teasing a mouse. Because this was the first time Xianxia came into contact with a necromancer, he wanted to thoroughly understand the cultivation system of the necromancer lineage. He only gave Sun Wen 3 chances to make a move. This was already the 3rd time. Sun Wen was a smart person, so naturally he would not waste this opportunity. Therefore, when he began to focus and gather qi, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the vicinity suddenly shook violently. Sure enough, Sun Wen had comprehended the truth of heaven and earth and began to try to use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to cooperate with his casting. Probably because it was his first time using this move, Sun Wen took a long time to prepare. Xianxia waited quietly. His curiosity was completely piqued by Sun Wen. He wanted to see what kind of amazing move a cultivation genius like Sun Wen would create. Because Earth was different from Heavenly Spiral, perhaps he could learn something from it? Xianxia was looking forward to it. And Sun Wen did not disappoint him. When the yin and yang formation condensed in front of Sun Wen's chest, it immediately turned into a black and white yin and yang fish. Then, it began to slowly spin and flow. The yin and yang fish spun faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the 2 yin and yang fish seemed to have completely merged into one, turning into a hazy gray that represented chaos. Black and white blended and returned to chaos. At this moment, Sun Wen suddenly let out a roar. Immediately after, blood began to ooze out of his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, bleeding from all orifices. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but be stunned for a moment before he suddenly came back to his senses. Sun Wen was burning his blood essence. As expected, when Sun Wen began to burn his blood essence, the aura on his body suddenly rose and exploded. The yin and yang fish in front of his chest also completely turned into a gray ball of light because of the rapid rotation. Sun Wen let out another roar. His sleeves bulged like a dragon, and then he suddenly pushed the light ball outward. Then, the gray light ball suddenly carried an indescribable aura and directly pressed toward Xianxia. Yin-Yang Calamity, Mountain River Seal. Destroy. Chapter 220. Tai Chi gave birth to Yin and Yang, yin and yang gave birth to the 4 divisions, and the 4 divisions gave birth to the 8 trigrams. Tai Chi was the fusion of vitality before heaven and earth were separated. It was the beginning and the unity of the universe. Simply put, Tai Chi represented chaos and yin and yang. The 4 divisions were the 5 elements. Metal, wood, water, and fire represented north, south, east, and west respectively. Earth was in the center of the 4 divisions and did not exist in the cycle of the 4 divisions. Therefore, it was also called the central earth, representing heaven and earth. Only with heaven and earth would there be the 4 divisions. Without heaven and earth, there would naturally be no 4 divisions. Therefore, earth was the first of the 5 elements and the beginning of all things. The mountain and river seal belonged to the earth element. This was Sun Wen's strongest killing move. The moment the mountain and river seal was formed, Xianxia could not help but raise his eyebrows. He could not help but have a serious expression on his face. Sun Wen had actually seen through the 5 elements and reversed yin and yang from the 4 divisions. From this, he had touched the true essence of Tai Chi with his strength as a peak diviner. He had actually struck out an attack that was not inferior to the divine generals when he burned his essence blood. Just this move alone was enough for Sun Wen to surpass many cultivators in this world. Just as the black and white yin-yang fish turned into a gray ball of light due to the high-speed rotation, Sun Wen's face deteriorated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just now, he looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. However, in the blink of an eye, his hair and beard were all white. He looked like an old man with half a foot in the ground. His haggard and weak appearance was somewhat similar to Zhao Guifan, who had lost her young soul and had her blood sucked by the blood thorns all day long. Blood flowed from his 7 orifices and his face was rapidly aging. However, Sun Wen's eyes suddenly flashed with joy. After pushing the gray ball of light towards Xianxia, he couldn't hold it in anymore and let out a long howl of excitement. Success! The gray ball of light was formed by Sun Wen's true essence and Dharma power. It contained his lifetime of cultivation. It was like a ball of smoke in a bubble. As it flew toward Xianxia, the ball of light seemed to be constantly rolling and rising. In terms of appearance, there was nothing strange about it. However, in Xianxia's opinion, this ball of light was not simple. Sun Wen did not disappoint him. Thus, Xianxia couldn't help but laugh. Earth element? You've come at the right time. Watch me use my lightning technique to break your earth element technique. The 5 elements mutually reinforce and counteract each other. Zhen represented thunder, and Sun represented wind. Zhen and Sun belonged to wood, and would restrain earth. Thunder just so happened to restrain earth. After saying that, Xianxia suddenly let go of the blood thorn grass in his hand. Then, a blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. In that instant, lightning appeared in the void, and thunder exploded. Xianxia stood proudly with the thunderbolt in his hand. Since Sun Wen was not a celestial being, he would control his cultivation base to that of a celestial being. It was also a form of respect for him to deal with someone of the same level. Thunder versus Earth. 49 Forms of Heavenly Divination, Spell Chapter, Thunder Art of Delusion. Xianxia was like a god descending, holding 2 thunderbolts in his hands. The blue lightning was like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue, constantly bubbling in Xianxia's palm. When the gray ball of light flew towards him, Xianxia opened his arms and fanned at the gray ball of light as if he was waving a banana fan. The thunderbolt and the gray ball collided in the air. In an instant, the aura energy shot out in all directions, and the surging true essence instantly set off an earth-shattering explosion in the cave. The abandoned mine that had long been dilapidated collapsed under the impact of the explosion, instantly turning into a pile of ruins. Ding! Xianxia arrived at the 108 National Highway. At this moment, his phone suddenly rang. He picked up his phone and opened it. It was a push message from Tencent News. #Earthquake News #February 24th 04, 17 a.m. A magnitude 3.2 earthquake occurred in the Xianxia area of Yuyu City. The tremor was not strong. The final result is based on the official report. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. After the Tangshan earthquake, 2 major earthquakes occurred in Wuxia in succession. This also meant that everyone began to pay more attention to news about earthquakes. It was estimated that the news of the earthquake in Yuqing would spread all over the country again tomorrow. After Xianxia finished reading this news, he opened his contact list and found the name Qin Xueqing in the contact list. Then he dialed the number. Although it was 4 in the morning, after the phone rang twice, Qin Xueqing directly picked up. Obviously, she was not sleeping but cultivating. Hello. I just met a person. Sunwen, do you know him? Sunwen? I seem to have an impression of him, but I'm not very sure. Wait a moment, I'll check first. After saying that, Qin Xueqing directly hung up the phone, obviously to make a call to verify. His sister-in-law was really swift and decisive. She held the phone and waited for about 5 minutes before she called back. I found him. Sun Wen from the Way of Peace, celestial level. He was born in the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty. The last time he appeared was 20 years ago. At this point, Qin Xueqing's tone could not help but be a little confused. She asked, "How did you meet such an old monster?" Yeah, I don't know if I'm lucky or he's unlucky. Send someone here. He's a celestial after all. Capturing him for a vivisection seems to be a contribution to society, right? After Xianxia's voice fell, there was no sound from the other end of the phone for a long time. Qin Xueqing thought that Xianxia only met Sun Wen face to face, but now that she heard the meaning of his words, did this mean that he was going to capture Sun Wen alive? Capturing a celestial alive? Her sister-in-law was stunned for a while before she came back to her senses. Then, she jumped out of bed slightly agitatedly and said quickly, "I'll bring someone over right away. What's the address?" "I'll send you the location." Okay. She would not joke with her on this kind of issue, so Qin Xueqing did not have any doubts at all. After hanging up the phone, she left the Sai courtyard. The Wu Lian had been established for so many years, but they had never captured a celestial alive. Who knew how much credit this was? In fact, it was not that the Wu Lian could not capture a celestial. It was just that capturing a celestial required extremely careful arrangements, and it would even cause a lot of trouble. Right now, everything was about maintaining stability. Therefore, Wu Lian could only turn a blind eye to the existence of the celestials. As long as they did not go too far, the Wu Lian would not encircle and annihilate them. She did not kill Sun Wen. Sun Wen was worthy of respect. After all, objectively speaking, if Sun Wen cultivated in the Tianyuan world for 500 years, perhaps his achievements would far surpass Xianxi's. This was talent. Wasn't talent the most lacking in the 21st century? Although Sun Wen was not a good person, Xianxia was not a judge after all. Handing him over to the Wu Lian and letting the Wu Lian deal with him was really a contribution to society. Chapter 221. The next day. Dawn had just broken when the villagers who had woken up early realized that there were many police cars in the village. Actually, the earthquake last night had awakened quite a number of people. However, Rain City had already experienced 2 major earthquakes, so a magnitude 3 or 4 earthquake was no different from a scratch in everyone's eyes. Therefore, the villagers who had woken up early did not discuss the earthquake last night. Instead, they gathered at the entrance to the mountain and whispered to each other about the situation on the mountain. The path up the mountain had already been sealed off by the police. Once the villagers got close, they would be politely asked to leave by the police. According to Old Wang, who had woken up at 6 o'clock to feed the chickens, he had even seen an armored vehicle drive up the mountain with his own eyes. Old Wang was a person who liked to talk big all the time, so everyone snorted at his words. If an armored vehicle was here, why didn't he say that there were planes and tanks? In the end, Old Wang had a flash of inspiration. He pointed at the new tire marks on the ground and asked everyone to examine them. Only then did everyone reluctantly believe his words. There were many families in Tongjiago who were professional truck drivers. Therefore, they were very knowledgeable about tire marks. The tire marks on the yellow dirt road did not seem to be left behind by a truck. The police were standing guard and the army was going up the mountain, so what exactly happened on the mountain? Everyone was very puzzled, but no one would tell them. When the little fellow woke up, it was already 9 o'clock in the morning. She had slept very deeply. Even after waking up, she was still in a daze for a long time. Qin Ring fetched a basin of hot water and helped the little fellow wash up in the living room. The little fellow turned her head in a daze and looked at the courtyard outside the old house. Her memory was still stuck on the night when she watched the movie. The little fellow blinked her eyes and looked outside the house. Then, she raised her head and looked at the decorations in the room. When she realized that she was in a completely unfamiliar environment, a puzzled expression appeared on her little face. Qin Ruing put away the wash basin and hung up the towel. Just as she was about to bring her to the kitchen for breakfast, the little thing suddenly changed her face like a master of Sichuan opera. Her little mouth suddenly pouted, and she burst into tears with a... Her parents had actually taken her to such an unfamiliar place while she was asleep. This was something that the little guy could not accept at all. Perhaps it was because she was scared, or perhaps it was because she had been wronged, but the little girl was crying so hard that people couldn't help but want to hold her in their arms and take good care of her. Her crying alarmed everyone in the room. Auntie Zhang and Chen Shi were discussing the problem of making millet porridge in the kitchen. When they heard the commotion outside, they hurriedly walked out of the kitchen. When they came out, they just happened to see the little girl standing in the main hall with an aggrieved face and crying loudly. Qin Ruing wanted to hug her, but she pushed her away with a pout. In the end, Auntie Zhang had to coax her. After telling her that this was her hometown, the little girl finally stopped crying. However, she was still unwilling to let Chen Shi and Qin Ruing get close to her. Seeing this, the couple could only look at each other helplessly and smile. From the looks of it, they would have to coax her for a long time before she would forgive them. After breakfast, the family walked out of the house and prepared to see the situation outside. The army going up the mountain and the police standing guard was a big deal. Some of the villagers who liked to watch didn't even bother to eat their breakfast properly. They squatted by the roadside with a bowl of noodles and ate while going up the mountain. Xing County was not big, and there were only a few people in the County Public Security Bureau. These young men in police uniforms were very impressive, but in reality, they might be someone's nephew. The police were also people. Although they knew that they had to keep it a secret, they really couldn't stand the continuous questioning. Thus, some of the ignorant youngsters secretly revealed some of the things that had happened on the mountain. It was said that the abandoned coal mine on the mountain was the source of the earthquake. After the earthquake, the Geological Survey Bureau found a rare mineral underneath. This kind of mineral was very rare in the world. It was said that it could be used to make an atomic bomb. Therefore, when Shangjing received the news, they immediately asked the County Public Security Bureau to cooperate with the armed police to guard the mine. The experts from Shangjing also flew over that night and were now exploring the mine. When did the people in the small mountain village hear such a mysterious story? Therefore, the whole village, men and women, old and young, gathered in front of the small road up the mountain. They all wanted to see what the mineral that could be used to make an atomic bomb looked like. If they could see the mineral with their own eyes, then they could boast to others in the future that the material to make an atomic bomb was dug out from their village. Chen Shi stood outside the crowd with the wronged little girl in his arms. After hearing the simple explanation of the situation, he was slightly speechless and laughed. Wu Lian was really amazing. In such a short time, he actually came up with such a decent excuse. Wu Lian probably did this kind of thing on a daily basis. After all, there were always a lot of things in this world that ordinary people could not achieve. They didn't even have the right to know. Most of the villagers were waiting at the intersection to see the atomic bomb. Chen Shi looked at the little girl for a while. After seeing that the little girl was still unhappy, he was ready to take her to dig winter bamboo shoots again. But just as Chen Shi and his family were about to leave, a saber-toothed tiger police armored vehicle suddenly drove down from the mountain. Seeing this, the villagers immediately let out a burst of enthusiastic cheers. The car was a special bulletproof car modified by a Ford Raptor. It was nearly 7 meters long, more than 3 meters tall, and weighed 6 tons. Its appearance was also very handsome. And behind this car, there were 3 warriors, which were real military off-road vehicles. The 4 cars slowly drove down from the mountain. Under the command of the police, the villagers retreated to the sides and made way for the cars. Xianxia and his family stood on the 108 National Highway. While he was explaining to the little girl about the big cars in front of them, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly stopped in front of their family. Then, Qin Shuecheng walked out from the front passenger seat. The sister-in-law first greeted Qin Ru. After calling her sister, she turned to look at Xianxia and said to him quite seriously, "Thank you." "It's nothing." Xianxia waved his hand very casually, as if he didn't take this matter to heart at all. Hearing this, Qin Shuecheng nodded, then turned to look at Aunt Zhang and said to her very politely, "Aunt Zhang, I'm Qin Shuecheng. I've seen you in the courtyard before, but I was still young at that time. I don't know if you still remember me?" Yes, of course I remember." Aunt Zhang was confused by Qin Shuecheng. Why was Inying's sister sitting in the car? Aunt Zhang was not very familiar with Qin Shuecheng, so she didn't know what to talk to her about. Seeing this, she interrupted in time and said, "Are you busy? Do you want to have lunch before leaving?" Chapter 222. Okay. Her nod shocked everyone present. Xianxia was just being polite. He did not expect his sister-in-law to take it seriously. Hearing this, Xianxia had to first glance at the few warriors parked behind the armored vehicle, and then asked, "Aren't you on a mission?" "The mission is complete. I can go back to Shangjing in the afternoon." "Oh. Okay then, let's talk about it after dinner." Qin Shuecheng opened the door and said a few words to the driver of the armored vehicle. Then, she followed Xianxia and his family to Aunt Zhang's old house. Her actions immediately caused the surrounding villagers to whisper to each other in whispers. "Hey, look, that girl came down from the armored vehicle. Yeah, why is she following Zhang San? Is she Zhang San's relative? That's crazy. Didn't they say that these people were experts from Shangjing? That young girl is an expert? She's from Xiaoqiu, she's from Shangjing." Later, it was an insider who answered everyone's questions. Aunt Zhang had been working as a nanny in Shangjing for the past few years. The young couple that she brought yesterday was her former employer. The expert from Shangjing probably knew Aunt Zhang's employer, which was why she was with them. After all, a family that could afford a nanny was probably not an ordinary family. It was natural for them to know an expert from Shangjing. Everyone thought about it and felt relieved. After the commotion, his sister-in-law also came to eat. But the little girl was still angry. As soon as she returned to the courtyard, she pouted and said that she wanted to go home. Seeing this, Xianxia had to use the same trick that he used yesterday. He was going to promise the little girl that she would only stay here for one night. If she still wanted to go home the next day, her parents would take her home. However, today's situation was different from yesterday. Yesterday, she wanted to see the village, so after being coaxed and tricked by Xianxia, although she was a bit unwilling, she didn't flip out on the spot. The reason why she was so angry today was that she found herself in a village when she woke up. In the little girl's mind, her parents did not discuss with her before secretly bringing her here. This was disrespectful to her, so she naturally flew into a rage. She really did not want to stay here for another day. She screamed for a long time. In the end, under the persuasion of Aunt Zhang and Qin Ruoying, the little girl pouted and reluctantly agreed to Xi's condition. "Then we'll stay for one night. Just one night. Pinky promise." This silly girl did not know that she had already fallen into her father's trap yesterday. So, She brought her to the bamboo forest to dig winter bamboo shoots. This time, there was no Zhao Guifan, so the little girls digging very happily. When she heard that Xianxia was going to use the winter bamboo shoots she dug out for lunch, the little thing was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, and her hands and feet couldn't help but become much more nimble. It was a new experience for the little guy to eat the vegetables he picked with his own hands. Why were farmhouse dishes delicious? Wasn't it because she could just pick whatever she wanted to eat from the fields? Fresh ingredients were the prerequisite for cooking food. Not sure if it was a psychological effect, but today's bamboo forest did not seem as gloomy as yesterday. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. The bright sunlight shone on top of the bamboo forest, making the bamboo forest lush green, making people feel a trace of spring. The blood thorn was hung on the wall by Xianxia. It was red and it formed a sharp contrast with the golden corn skewers next to it. In the village, everyone liked to hang chili and corn outside the house. First, it was for ventilation and dryness. Second, it was a symbol. Chili symbolized red and corn symbolized a bountiful harvest. Both were good omens. In fact, when Xianxia saw Sun Wen's 5 elements soul refining technique, he already knew why Aunt Zhang suddenly fainted. It turned out that Sun Wen used Aunt Zhang as the next batch of cultivation cauldrons. The principle of the 5 elements soul refining technique was actually similar to the blood thorn grass. It was to absorb other people's soul and essence to strengthen oneself. It was precisely because Sun Wen came into contact with the blood thorn grass that he comprehended the 5 elements soul refining technique. Because Aunt Zhang had taken the spirit cultivation pill, the remaining spirit energy in her body attracted Sun Wen's attention. Fortunately, Xianxia noticed the abnormality in time and insisted on coming to Aunt Zhang's home to take a look. Otherwise, Aunt Zhang was afraid that she would inevitably follow in Zhao Guifen's footsteps. After putting down Sun Wen, Xianxia also saved Zhao Guifen. Therefore, when he took the little fellow to dig bamboo shoots in the bamboo forest, a series of firecrackers suddenly sounded not far away. Wasn't it from Zhao Guifen's house? Looking at the situation, it was probably to celebrate Zhao Guifen's not crazy anymore. Zhao Guifen had a younger sister named Zhao Guixiang. She was Zhao Guifen's only relative in this world. The relationship between the two sisters was very good. Zhao Guifen had been crazy for so long, but Zhao Guixiang did not leave her and stayed at her house to take care of her. Early this morning, when Zhao Guixiang was about to help Zhao Guifen get up and wash up, Zhao Guifen suddenly called out her name, Guixiang. These 2 short words made Zhao Guixiang's eyes fill with tears on the spot. She hugged her sister and burst into tears. There was a custom in the countryside, which was to set off firecrackers when there was a joyous occasion. The firecrackers in Zhao Guifen's house sounded for a long time. In less than half an hour, the entire village knew that Zhao Guifen was no longer crazy. The crazy woman was no longer crazy, and everyone was happy for her. Zhao Guixiang was so happy that she even informed the entire village that she was going to hold a pig slaughtering feast to celebrate her sister's recovery. Aunt Zhang's family also received Zhao Guixiang's invitation. However, just when everyone was happy for Zhao Guifen's recovery, Xianxia sighed silently. Zhao Guifen had lost her yang soul for a long time. Even he could only temporarily restore Zhao Guifen's consciousness and could not save her life. It was estimated that before the pig slaughtering feast began, Zhao Guixiang would have to change the funeral for her sister. Zhao Guifen was also a pitiful person. The culprit of everything was Sun Wen. Although Sun Wen was a talent, his unscrupulous behavior of disregarding human life also aroused Xianxia's disgust. Therefore, when the little fellow volunteered to wash the winter bamboo shoots, Xianxia found Qin Xueqing and asked in detail how Wu Lian would deal with Sun Wen. After all, he was a diviner, so Wu Lian obviously only had one way to deal with Sun Wen. That was to persuade him to surrender and recruit him. As long as Sun Wen was willing to join the Wu Lian, then Wu Lian would be able to let bygones be bygones. This also made Xianxia very dissatisfied. He thought that Wu Lian would dissect Sun Wen for research, but he did not expect to get this result. Chapter 223. How to deal with Sun Wen had become a problem. It would be a pity to kill him, but it would be difficult to resolve the hatred in his heart if he didn't kill him. Using living people to cultivate and turning them into idiots was an evil art that went against the harmony of the heavens. He would definitely suffer retribution. Xianxia was probably Sun Wen's savior. Since that was the case, Xianxia could only enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and let Sun Wen experience Zhao Guifen's pain. Thus, Xianxia specially refined a pill for Sun Wen. For this reason, he even used a bit of blood thorn grass. It could be said that wool comes from a sheep's back. Heart-devouring ants. However, they weren't ants. They were a type of pill, or rather, poison. When someone consumed this pill, they would feel as if their entire body was being bitten by fire ants every half an hour. The heart-wrenching pain didn't come from the body, but from the soul. Thus, it couldn't be described with words. It was densely packed, as if every inch of their skin was being burned by fire and pierced by needles. Every time the pill took effect, the poisoned person would feel a pain worse than death. They could only lie on the ground weakly, struggling and praying for the pill's effect to pass quickly. This pill came from the most poisonous sect in Heavenly Spiral. It was also developed by them to punish disciples who committed grave mistakes. It didn't harm their lives, but it also made them feel a pain worse than death. It made them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts, and they would never dare to commit the same mistake again. Although this pill couldn't kill people, it was said that many disciples couldn't withstand the endless heart-wrenching torture and chose to commit suicide to seek relief. He didn't know if Sun Wen could withstand this kind of torture. Xianxia only hoped that Sun Wen could be strong and not be played to death. If Sun Wen died, it might really be a great loss to the Wulian. Lunch was authentic farmhouse food. Because Auntie Zhang's house didn't have any natural gas or induction cookers, the old house naturally used a firewood stove. Perhaps it was a psychological effect, but the food made from the firewood stove seemed to be exceptionally fragrant. The little fellow sniffed and picked up a piece of bamboo shoot. After tasting it, she immediately pointed at the plate of bamboo shoots fried with meat and laughed happily. "I dug this. Good, good, good. Let's see what you're capable of." Auntie Zhang smiled and patted her little head. After giving her a piece of lean meat, she gestured for her to sit properly. It had been a long time since the old house had been so lively. Aunt Zhang's family of 3, Little Bean's family of 3, Qianxi's family of 3, and Qin Xueqing's family of 3, this meal was really lively. The table was filled with authentic farmhouse dishes. The little girl giggled as she ate. She seemed to have completely forgotten that she was insisting on going home just a moment ago. In fact, not only were the vegetables delicious, even the rice was exceptionally delicious. This was because Auntie Zhang's cooking utensils were not electric cookers, but retorts. It was the 21st century. Every household used an electric cooker to cook rice, so many people didn't even know what a retorta was. In the past, a wooden bucket was used to cook rice, and that bucket was called a retorta. The rice steamed with a retorta was called retorted rice, and the taste was completely different from the rice steamed in an electric cooker. Steaming rice in an electric cooker was very simple. Put an appropriate amount of rice and water in it, cover it with a lid, and wait for the meal. But retorted rice was different. Before the electric cooker was popularized, steaming rice was actually a very troublesome thing. It also required a certain amount of experience and skill. Otherwise, if one was careless, the steamed rice would be half-cooked, or the steamed rice would be extremely hard with no moisture at all. Many people felt that retorted rice was hard, but in fact, this was because the steamed rice was not good enough. They didn't steam the rice with the right amount of softness and richness. Now, generally, only restaurants used retorts to cook rice. This was the first time the little fellow had eaten this kind of rice, so naturally, she felt that the rice was exceptionally fragrant. After lunch, the sister-in-law left with the Yida bottle that Qianxia gave her. The toxicity of the heart-eating ant would attack every half an hour, and each attack lasted about 5 minutes. The Yida bottle contained the antidote, and one pill could suppress the toxicity for a day. The toxicity of this antidote was so strong that once it took effect, it could do nothing but lie on the ground and struggle. Wu Lian still counted on Sun Wen to do things, so Qianxia naturally had to give him an antidote to suppress the toxicity. Letting Sun Wen earn the antidote through good performance was like giving a sweet date after a slap. This was the highest level of controlling people. Sun Wen's problem was solved, but the little fellow's problem was not. Although she was still smiling when eating, if she didn't find anything fun in the afternoon, she would probably curse at night. Qianxia pondered for a moment, and after saying goodbye to Qin Ruoying, he took the little fellow to the river. It was still very cold in the valley at the beginning of spring. The little girl was wearing a thick down jacket and a cotton cap. She was wrapped up tightly, only revealing a small pink face. As soon as she arrived at the valley, she stepped on the big stones and skipped to the river. Then, she squatted on the stone and carefully reached out to touch the cold river water. She had never been to the river before, so of course, she was very excited. Seeing the master make it on the spot and draw a dragon with his bare hands, the little thing's eyes were about to pop out. When the master was done with the sugar painting, she held the dragon in one hand and the rat in the other. The remaining dog was fed to Xianxia. Aunt Zhang watched with a smile on her face. Ever since the little thing was accompanied by her parents, even the smile on her face was more than before. Just as the family surrounded the sugar painting stall and praised the sugar painting master's skills with laughter, there was suddenly a commotion on the other side of the road. Looking at the sound of gongs, drums, and firecrackers, it seemed that someone was picking up the bride. When the little girl heard the commotion, she immediately shouted for Xianxia to pick her up to take a look. Sure enough, as the sound of gongs and drums got closer, a wedding procession appeared in the little girl's line of sight. The wedding procession's formation was impressive. In front, there were gongs and drums to clear the way, followed by a palanquin with 8 carriers. Along the way, the villagers all retreated to the sides of the road to make enough aisle for the wedding procession. The wedding procession forcibly crossed the entire Siping village just like that. Looking at the formation, it seemed a little too ostentatious. In fact, what the villagers really avoided was not the palanquin and the folk band, but the dozens of young people following behind the palanquin. These young people carried a few large loudspeakers and sang Zhang Yu's "For You" loudly as they walked. It must be a special fate that allowed us to become a family along the way. The more you love her, the more she will return the favor. Find the possibility of happiness. Their voices were very loud, and in the end, they directly suppressed the bustle of the market, so much so that the transactions on the entire street temporarily stopped. Only the singing of "For You" could be heard, as if they were singing the national anthem. The villagers all moved to the sides of the street and silently watched them pass by. The little girl had never seen such a formation before. She immediately sat in Xianxia's arms and exclaimed, "Wow!" Then one of the young people could not help but whistle at Qin Run. The turn of events was too sudden, so much so that the people around were stunned for a while before they finally regained their senses. They hurriedly squatted beside the young man and used a lot of effort to pull him up from the ground. "Spring Baby? Is there no problem?" The young man who was known as Spring Baby had suffered a heavy slap in the face. Although Xianxia had already shown mercy, he still made his head faint for a short while. After lying on the ground to recover for a while, he finally covered his head and stood up with the help of his companions. Spring Baby looked to be in his early 20s. He was not tall and was almost half a head shorter than Xianxia. He looked thin and thin. In Chuanyu dialect, he was as thin as a chicken. However, although this chicken's physical fitness was not very good, his temper was very irritable. After he stood up shakily, a trace of viciousness flashed across Spring Baby's face. Then he roared at Xianxia and said, "F***CKU, be***starred. How dare you hit me?" After saying that, Spring Baby carried an aura like a ferocious beast that had been released from its cage. He glared and clenched his fists, charging directly toward Xianxia. The young man was arrogant and thought that he could defeat anyone with a fierce force. But to be honest, with their bodies that had long been exhausted by cigarettes and alcohol, not to mention that the person standing opposite was Xianxia, even a middle-aged uncle who had been farming all year round on the street could probably defeat him with one hand. Therefore, When Spring Baby rushed toward Xianxia, he was instantly kicked back by Xianxia. Spring Baby was also lucky because today's occasion was different. Aunt Zhang and the little girl were watching from the side, so Xianxia was very gentle. With one kick, other than sending Spring Baby flying, Xianxia did not break several of Zhao Yuan's ribs like the last time he kicked Zhao Yuan. Xianxia showed mercy, but Spring Baby did not have the slightest awareness in this regard. After being supported by his companions behind him, he spat on the ground fiercely and then took out a butterfly knife from his trouser pocket. As the saying goes, the unreasonable are afraid of the reckless, and the reckless are afraid of the reckless. This kind of hooligan in his early 20s happened to be in the final stage of his Chunibu syndrome. For young people like them who had wine today, they would drink today and worry about tomorrow. The two words fear and regret never existed in their dictionaries. As long as their temper flared up, they could really do anything. Perhaps when they calmed down afterward, they would also feel afraid, but at the moment of the incident, there was definitely only one word in their minds: just do it. Moreover, this was his territory, and there were dozens of brothers standing behind him. If he admitted defeat now, how could he survive in the underworld in the future? Since he could not win with his fists and feet, Spring Baby naturally had to show his knife. Get out of the way. I'm going to kill him today. No one stopped him, and a few of his quick-witted companions even quietly took a few steps to the side. All of this happened very suddenly. When Aunt Zhang finally came back to her senses and wanted to stop it, Spring Baby had already taken the butterfly knife and slashed towards Xianxia. Xianxia did not want the little girl to see the cruel side of the adult world, so he used his left hand to support the little girl's, but, while his right hand gently pressed the back of the little girl's head, making her obediently lie on his shoulder and not turn her head. The little girl blinked her eyes, somewhat unable to understand what was going on with her father. However, she was very obedient. After hearing Xianxia's instructions, she wrapped her arms around Xianxia's neck, and then obediently rested her chin on Xianxia's shoulder. Then, the little girl heard a strange sound. First, there was a crisp ka sound, then the clang-clang sound of a knife falling to the ground, and finally Spring Baby's earth-shattering scream. A few of the more upright brothers saw this and immediately let out a roar, F*CKU. Tack together. Hack him to death. The street was in chaos, and the bridal procession had already stopped. Dozens of young people blocked Xianxia's family in front of the sugar painting stall. The sugar painter was so scared that he had already run into a shop on the street. 7 or 8 youngsters surrounded Xianxia, making a ruckus. Just now, they thought that Chunhua Air could handle it, so they didn't make a move. Now that they saw Chunhua Air being defeated, they naturally wouldn't stand by and watch. Seeing this, Xianxia gently squeezed Qin Ruing's palm and then took a few steps forward. Qin Ruing naturally knew what Xianxia meant. However, after thinking for a moment, she did not say anything. Instead, she came to Aunt Zhang's side and comforted her in a low voice. Aunt Zhang was already frightened by the scene in front of her. This was the first time she saw Xianxia fight with someone. Moreover, the people in front of her were not good people, so Aunt Zhang immediately shouted at Xie Pinglin nervously, "Pinglin! Call the police quickly!" After saying that, she turned her head and shouted at Xianxia, "Xianxia, what are you doing? Come here quickly, we'll wait for the police to come." As she said that, Aunt Zhang wanted to pull Xianxia back. However, she had just taken a step when she was stopped by Qin Ruing in time. Looking at the agitated look on her grandmother's face, the little girl lying on Xianxia's shoulder was really confused about the situation. When Chunhua screamed earlier, Xianxia used his vital essence to block her ears in time, so she did not hear the movements around her at all. The little girl wanted to turn around to take a look, but Xianxia gently pressed the back of her head, not letting her turn her head. Therefore, the little girl immediately pouted unhappily. She twisted her small body and shouted in dissatisfaction, "Put me down. I want to go to mommy." The scene was chaotic. Xianxia's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. There were at least 1,000 people on this street for the market today. Moreover, Nyanyan and Aunt Zhang were also watching by the side, so he had been merciful. If the tiger did not show its might, these bastards would really think that he was a sick cat? Just as Xianxia was about to fly into a rage, a roar suddenly came from the loudspeaker. "Xin, today is Laozi's wedding, you bastards want claws." The volume of the loudspeaker was already very loud, so when the roar came out, the entire street immediately became silent. When the youths heard this voice, they were immediately stunned on the spot. After looking at each other, they decisively turned around and returned to the crowd. Then, a man who looked to be about 30 or 40 years old walked out of the palanquin. After a dislocated shoulder occurred, the muscles around the shoulder joint would be in a state of shock for a short period of time, so it would not be very painful when it happened. But once the shock period passed, the muscles around the arm would be in a state of spasm, causing the pain to worsen and making it very difficult to reset. Chun Wawa had now passed the shock period, and that kind of piercing pain was really unbearable for him. The doctor had just touched his arm, and Chun Wawa was already in so much pain that he cried out. Villagers often suffered dislocations when they were doing heavy work, so the doctors in the town hospital were very good at treating dislocations. The doctor first pretended to massage Chun Wawa's arm as if nothing had happened. Then, while he was crying out, the doctor suddenly grabbed his arm and twisted it skillfully. After a crisp click, the doctor reconnected Chun Wawa's arm. Although the shoulder joint was reset, the sudden sharp pain made Chun Wawa roll his eyes. It was so painful that he didn't even have the strength to cry out. "Okay, you rest first. I'll give you a splint later. Don't move around for half a month. Otherwise, it is very likely to cause ossifying myositis, and it will become a habitual dislocation in the future." After the doctor gave a few instructions, Chun-Wa lay on the chair and moaned weakly. At this moment, a young man suddenly rushed in from outside the door and shouted at Chun-Wa, "Third brother, that kid is running away. What should we do?" Hearing this, Spring Child suddenly jumped up from the chair with strength that came from nowhere. Then he straightened his neck and roared angrily, "Run my ass." If he couldn't catch up, he would record the license plate number. "I will definitely hack him to death." After that, he clutched his shoulder and cried out in pain. Because of this sudden interlude, Xianxia and his family could only return resentfully. The little girl cried for a long time before she finally stopped crying under Auntie Zhang's comfort. Then, she pressed her little face against the window and sulked. No matter who spoke to her, she didn't want to respond. While Lil Thing was sulking, Xianxia was also very depressed. He didn't expect that his wife would be taken advantage of when he went out shopping. He even scared Auntie Zhang and made the child cry. Everything was going wrong. These bastards thought of him as Gao Yanai, but he wasn't Lin Chong. If Auntie Zhang wasn't beside him today, he would have seen what these bastards would dare to do. The atmosphere in the car was very gloomy. No one spoke. Auntie Zhang still felt that Xianxia's way of handling things today was wrong. Those hooligans only whistled at Qin Ring, but Xianxia's reaction was so intense. He went up and slapped them. Of course, they had to fight. So after thinking for a while, Auntie Zhang couldn't help but scold Xianxia. Hearing this, Xianxia could only nod with a bitter face, but he didn't think so at all. Just now, he was standing by the side, but these bastards still whistled at Qin Ring. What if he wasn't there at that time? What if these scumbags were drinking at that time, or saw such a beautiful woman in a remote place? Could it be that they had to swallow their teeth after being taken advantage of? But although it was a small matter, it involved a matter of principle, so Xianxia couldn't bear it at all. Auntie Zhang wasn't a naggy person. After saying a few more words, she sighed deeply and put this matter aside for the time being. Then, she asked the van driver about the situation. The van driver went back and forth between various towns all year round, so he was naturally clear about the surrounding matters. When he heard about the wedding procession made up of dozens of young people, he immediately smiled and said, "Haven't you heard of the name Li Diaming? He loves to do these kinds of things." Today is his wedding, so he must make it more lively. Li Diaming, the man who came out of the palanquin, was the village tyrant in this area, according to the current popular vocabulary. His father was the former high-ranking official of the Siping village party, but he had retired now. Although the village was poor, village bullies were not to be underestimated. A qualified village bully's wealth was no less than the boss of some large enterprises. There were many kinds of village bullies. Because of the country's punishment, the village bullies basically wouldn't use violence to run rampant in the village and prey on the people. They would use other places instead. For example, the village bully who openly embezzled the country's subsidies during the Wenchuan earthquake. This kind of person was the most retarded and deserved to be shot. Those who were slightly smarter would use the method of using agents to contract the forest and mineral resources in the village at a low price. The contract period would be 60 to 70 years, and it would be passed down from generation to generation. More advanced ones, such as the villages near the city, would even involve demolition. Many village bullies were the bosses of real estate companies, and the so-called employees were actually their hired thugs. Li Diaming belonged to the most intelligent type of village bully. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.